Daniel Brooks sat in his cramped Atlanta apartment staring at the number on his laptop screen. 7 figures followed by 2 commas and a promise of zeros that seemed almost obscene. The email from Tech Venture Capital had arrived 3 hours ago, confirming the acquisition of SyncFlow, the productivity app he'd spent 3 years coding in the shadows while everyone else slept. 20% equity suddenly meant $1.2 million hitting his account within 48 hours. His hands trembled as he closed the laptop, not from excitement, but from the terrifying realization that his entire life was about to change, and he had absolutely no idea who he could trust with this information. The walls of his studio apartment suddenly felt smaller, the air thicker, as if the money itself was already pressing down on him, demanding decisions he wasn't ready to make. Daniel had learned early that money changed people, turned family into strangers and strangers into family. His father had abandoned them when Daniel was 7 after a small lottery win, choosing a new life in Arizona over the one he'd built in Georgia. That memory alone kept Daniel's mouth shut at his mother's Sunday dinner, at his cousin's graduation party, at every family gathering where the question, "How's work?" hung in the air like a test he refused to take. But Aunt Carla was different. She'd been there when his college fund evaporated, slipping him $200 in a birthday card with a note that said, "Chase your dreams, baby. I believe in you." She'd bragged about his coding skills to anyone who'd listen, even when he was just building websites for local barbershops. Carla was flashy, sure. Always dressed like she was heading to a music video shoot, always talking about her next big venture. But she'd never asked him for anything, never made him feel small for choosing computers over something more traditionally successful. So 3 days after the money hit his account, Daniel found himself driving his 12-year-old Honda Civic through Midtown Atlanta toward Aunt Carla's townhouse, rehearsing the conversation in his head. He wouldn't tell her the exact amount, just that things had worked out, that he'd finally caught a break. The October evening was cooling down, golden hour painting the city in amber light as he pulled up to her place. A modest 2-story rental she'd decorated to look like a penthouse, complete with fake marble columns flanking the entrance. He could hear music thumping from inside before he even knocked, something with heavy bass that made the door vibrate under his knuckles. When Carla answered, she was dressed for a night out, tight black dress, heels that added 4 inches to her height, makeup that could survive a hurricane, and the smell of expensive perfume mixed with something else, something like ambition or desperation. Daniel couldn't quite tell which. "Baby boy, look at you showing up unannounced. I'm about to head out, but come in, come in." Carla pulled him into a hug that smelled like vanilla and vodka, already tipsy from pre-gaming, her laugh loud enough to echo down the quiet street. Inside, her place was exactly as he remembered. Animal print everywhere, framed photos of herself at various clubs and parties, a bar cart that looked professionally stocked, LED lights casting purple and blue across the ceiling. "Auntie, I got some good news I wanted to share with you," Daniel started, but Carla was already pouring him a drink he didn't ask for, talking over him about some new club downtown that just opened, how she'd met the owner, how she was getting VIP access tonight. He noticed her phone buzzing constantly on the counter, the screen lighting up with messages from a contact saved as V with a crown emoji. Something about her energy felt different, more scattered, more hungry than he remembered. "Auntie, seriously, I need to tell you something important," Daniel finally interrupted, his voice cutting through her monologue about bottle service and DJ lineups. Carla stopped mid-pour, her perfectly drawn eyebrows rising as she turned to face him fully, and for just a second Daniel saw the woman who'd believed in him when nobody else did. The aunt who'd scraped together money, she didn't have to help him survive. "That app I've been working on? The one I told you about last year? It got acquired. I'm good now, Auntie. Like really good." He watched her face transform, watched the information process behind her eyes. First confusion, then understanding, then something else he couldn't quite name that made his stomach tighten. Her hand went to her chest, her mouth falling open in genuine shock, but there was something else there too, something calculating that flickered across her features so quickly he almost missed it. "Oh my God, Danny. Baby, I knew it. I always knew you'd make it big." Carla squealed, rushing over to hug him again, this time tighter, longer, her acrylic nails digging slightly into his back through his shirt. When she pulled away, her eyes were wet, but Daniel couldn't tell if they were tears of joy or something else entirely. "How much we talking? Like 6 figures? Oh baby, this is incredible." He'd planned to be vague, but something about her direct question, the way she asked without pretense, made him feel like he owed her honesty. "More than that, Auntie. Enough to change everything. He didn't say the number, but he saw her do the math anyway, saw her pupils dilate slightly as possibility bloomed in her mind. Her phone buzzed again on the counter, multiple times in quick succession, and she glanced at it with an expression Daniel had never seen before. Like someone who'd just found the missing piece to a puzzle she'd been working on for weeks. "Listen, baby, I'm so proud of you. You have no idea," Carla said, pulling back and holding him at arm's length, her hands on his shoulders, her eyes searching his face with an intensity that felt almost uncomfortable. "You're going to have people coming at you from every direction now, asking for money, trying to get a piece of what you built. But I need you to promise me something. Don't make any big decisions without talking to me first, okay? I've been around, I know how these streets work, and I don't want nobody taking advantage of my brilliant nephew." Her words made sense, carried the weight of genuine concern, but something about the delivery felt rehearsed, like lines from a play she'd been preparing to perform. Daniel nodded, relief washing over him that she was thinking about his protection rather than her own gain. "I won't, Auntie. You're the only person I'm telling about this anyway. Mama doesn't even know yet." Carla's phone exploded with calls then, the ringtone, something by Drake, filling the small living room insistently. "Ugh, that's my girls, they're already at the club," she said, grabbing her phone and a small designer purse from the counter, her moment of intensity dissolving into party mode excitement. "Come with me tonight, baby. Let's celebrate your success. You never come out with your old auntie anymore." Daniel shook his head, already backing toward the door, the thought of sweaty clubs and overpriced drinks making him tired. "Nah, I'm good, Auntie. You go have fun. Just be safe, okay?" Carla rolled her eyes, already texting as she ushered him out, blowing him an exaggerated kiss from her doorstep. "Always am, baby. And Danny, we're going to talk more about this. Figure out how to make your money work for you. How to turn that million into 10 million. I got connections you wouldn't believe." She winked, and Daniel drove away feeling oddly unsettled, watching in his rearview mirror as she locked her door and headed toward her own car, a lease Mercedes she could barely afford. Her heels clicking against the pavement with the confidence of someone who'd just been handed an opportunity they'd been waiting their entire life to exploit. What Daniel didn't know, what he couldn't have known as he drove back to his small apartment with his life-changing secret, was that Aunt Carla wasn't heading to meet her girlfriends at all. She was heading to the Apex, an upscale nightclub in Buckhead, where 3 weeks earlier she'd met a man who made promises that sounded too good to be true, a man with expensive cologne and a smile that made her feel 25 again. A man who'd whispered in her ear about opportunities and investments and futures that sparkled like the diamonds he wore on his pinky finger. A man named Victor Kane. And as Carla sat in Atlanta traffic, reapplying her lipstick in the visor mirror, she wasn't thinking about protecting her nephew's newfound wealth. She was thinking about how this information was going to change her own life forever. How Victor had told her just last night that all he needed was access to real money, serious money, and he could make them both rich beyond imagination. Her phone lit up again. "You coming tonight, baby? Got something big to discuss." Carla smiled at the message, her heart racing with possibility and just a touch of something that might have been guilt if she'd allowed herself to feel it, and she typed back 3 words that would set everything in motion. "I got news. Money doesn't corrupt people. It just gives them permission to become who they've always wanted to be." The Apex nightclub sat on the 17th floor of a Buckhead high-rise like a crown of sin and possibility, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view of Atlanta that made everyone inside feel like masters of the universe they could see twinkling below. Victor Kane stood at his usual spot near the VIP section. Nursing a glass of Hennessy, he'd convinced a desperate bartender to put on someone else's tab, his tailored charcoal suit fitting him like it had been painted on, his salt and pepper hair slicked back to reveal a face that had learned to weaponize charm before most people learned to walk. At 42, Victor had perfected the art of looking successful without actually being successful, of seeming connected without having real connections, of making promises so beautiful that people ignored the mathematical impossibility of them ever coming true. He watched the crowd with the patient intensity of a predator who'd already eaten today but was always planning tomorrow's meal, his gray-green eyes calculating net worth based on watch brands and handbag logos, dismissing the genuine wealthy as too cautious and focusing instead on the desperate ones. The people who dressed rich but ordered well drinks. The ones whose jewelry was real but whose confidence was rented. Victor had been running variations of the same con for 15 years, ever since a 3-year prison stint for wire fraud had taught him two valuable lessons. First, that the legal system only protected people who already had enough money not to need protection. And second, that the best marks were never the richest people, but the people who desperately wanted to be rich, who could taste wealth but couldn't quite touch it, who were hungry enough to ignore red flags the size of billboards. He'd worked the circuit from Miami to Chicago, leaving behind a trail of empty bank accounts and broken trust that he wore like invisible medals, each conquest adding another layer to his performance. Atlanta had been good to him these past 8 months. Good enough that he was getting comfortable, which his parole officer would have told him was dangerous if he'd bothered showing up to their mandatory meetings. The city was full of new money and old dreams, rappers who'd hit it big and athletes with short careers and long spending habits, entrepreneurs riding the tech wave who didn't quite understand that their equity wasn't the same as cash, and most importantly, people like Carla, attractive, middle-aged, socially connected women who still believed in fairy tales as long as they came wrapped in a nice suit and an expensive cologne. Victor had spotted Carla 3 weeks ago on a slow Tuesday night. She'd been celebrating something with girlfriends, buying rounds she couldn't afford, laughing too loud in that way people do when they're trying to convince themselves they're having more fun than they actually are. What caught his attention wasn't her looks, though she maintained herself well for 47, but the way she carried herself. Expensive taste with a modest budget, designer labels that were one season too old, the kind of woman who'd figured out how to look like money without having it and was exhausted from keeping up the performance. He'd approached during a bathroom break, accidentally on purpose bumping into her near the bar, buying her a drink while apologizing, letting his accent, carefully neutral, carefully ambiguous, could be anywhere from Boston to Barcelona depending on what you wanted to hear, work its magic. "You don't seem like the type who needs to be here," he'd said, and she'd laughed, a real laugh that time, before responding, "Baby, we all need to be somewhere. Might as well be somewhere with good music and strong drinks." That first conversation had lasted 20 minutes, which Victor had stretched into an exchange of numbers, which became a late-night text conversation, which became a coffee date that turned into a dinner he'd managed to have her pay for while making her feel privileged to do so. He'd fed her a story about being a private equity consultant who'd made his money in tech investments, but kept a low profile to avoid energy vampires and gold diggers, which was hilarious in its irony but effective nonetheless. He'd name-dropped companies he'd never worked with, mentioned deals he'd never closed, created an entire fictional portfolio of successes that existed only in his smooth delivery and her desperate willingness to believe. By their third meeting, Carla was fully invested. Not financially yet, that would come later, but emotionally, which was always more valuable anyway. She'd started dressing differently for him, started talking about her dreams with the breathless hope of someone who'd found an ally, started mentioning family members with money and connections, planting seeds she didn't even realize she was planting. Victor's specialty was the partnership opportunity, a business venture that sounded legitimate enough to survive casual scrutiny, but vague enough to avoid any real accountability. His current pitch was a hybrid luxury lounge and cryptocurrency investment fund, a concept he'd cobbled together from trending articles and conversations he'd overheard from actual entrepreneurs. The beauty was in the timing. Crypto was mainstream enough to sound legitimate, but still mysterious enough that most people didn't really understand it, and luxury lounges were sexy, visual, something people could imagine themselves being part of. He'd created fake documents using templates from the internet, registered an LLC that cost him less than $300, built a website that looked professional enough if you didn't click too many links, and most importantly, he'd cultivated the patient confidence of someone who had nothing to prove because he'd already proved it all. To Carla, he'd presented the opportunity carefully, mentioning he was looking for a cultural ambassador who understood Atlanta's social scene, someone with connections who could help make the lounge a celebrity destination. And oh, by the way, did she know anyone with substantial capital looking for ground-floor investment opportunities in high-growth ventures? For 2 weeks, Carla had danced around the question, mentioning cousins and friends who had some money, but nothing that met Victor's minimum investment threshold of $500,000. He'd been patient, knowing that desperation needed time to ferment, that the best cons were never rushed but cultivated like expensive wine. Then tonight, when her text came through, "I got news." Victor felt that familiar electricity in his chest, the sensation that had become as addictive as any drug, the moment when a carefully constructed trap was about to snap closed on prey that had walked in willingly. He'd responded immediately, arranging to meet her at the Apex in an hour, then spent that time preparing. His performance, reminding himself of every detail he'd told her about his fictional empire, so he wouldn't contradict himself. Visualizing how he'd react to whatever news she brought with just the right mixture of enthusiasm and cool assessment, the way real investors supposedly behaved in movies. Now, standing in the Apex with the bass vibrating through his Italian leather shoes, Victor checked his watch for the third time in 5 minutes. A gesture of impatience, he allowed himself in private before Carla arrived, and he had to become whoever she needed him to be. The club was filling up with the Saturday night crowd. Young professionals spending paychecks on bottles that would give them Instagram photos worth more than the alcohol itself. Aspiring models and athletes and influencers, all performing their own versions of success for an audience that was too busy performing their own to notice anyone else. Victor fit perfectly into this ecosystem of beautiful lies, his tailored suit and confident posture reading as exactly what people wanted to see rather than what was actually there. He'd positioned himself strategically, visible but not too eager, important but not unapproachable, and when he finally spotted Carla entering the club in her tight black dress and towering heels, her eyes scanning the crowd for him with an excitement that bordered on manic, he allowed himself a small smile before rearranging his face into the warm, professional expression she'd come to trust. "Baby." Carla's voice cut through the music as she navigated the crowd toward him, her hug lasting a beat longer than usual, her perfume stronger tonight like she'd applied an extra dose of confidence along with it. Victor returned the embrace with the perfect balance of warmth and restraint, pulling back to look at her with what appeared to be genuine affection, but was actually the intense focus of someone reading micro-expressions for valuable intel. "You look absolutely stunning tonight," he said, and meant it in the way a jeweler might admire a diamond they're about to acquire for below market value. "Come, sit, tell me what's got you so excited." He guided her to his booth, the one he'd sweet-talked a waitress into reserving by promising a tip he'd never deliver, and ordered Carla her usual drink, vodka cranberry middle shelf, which he'd quietly upgraded to top shelf tonight because the investment in her happiness would pay dividends shortly. As she settled into the leather seat, her body language screamed important news being barely contained, and Victor leaned back with the patience of someone who'd played this scene 100 times before, knowing that silence was often more effective than questions. "So you remember how I told you about my nephew, the smart one who's always on his computers doing that tech stuff?" Carla started, and Victor nodded slowly, carefully not appearing too interested despite his pulse quickening imperceptibly. He'd learned long ago that marks needed to feel like they were leading the conversation, like the brilliant idea was theirs rather than his. "Well, he came by my place tonight, and Victor, baby, listen." She grabbed his hand, her acrylic nails pressing into his palm with excitement. "His app, that thing he's been working on for years, it just got bought by some big company. He's got over $1 million coming to him. Cash. Real money." She watched his face for a reaction, and Victor gave her exactly what she needed. Eyes widening in genuine surprise, a low whistle of appreciation, a smile that suggested both pride for her nephew and recognition of opportunity. "That's incredible, Carla. That's the kind of success most people only dream about. You must be so proud of him." I really am," Carla continued, her words coming faster now, vodka and adrenaline mixing into liquid courage. "But Victor, he's so young, you know? He doesn't know anything about money, about investing, about making his fortune work for him. And I'm thinking," she paused, taking a sip of her drink for courage, "I'm thinking about what you told me about your investment fund, about the lounge opportunity. What if Danny could be one of the founding investors? You said you needed $1 million to secure the property and get everything started, and here's my nephew with exactly that, and I could be the connection that makes this all work." The words tumbled out of her in a rush, and Victor watched her carefully, seeing not just greed, though that was certainly there, but also genuine belief that she was doing something good, that she'd found a way to help her nephew while helping herself, that the math somehow worked out where everyone won and nobody lost. It was almost sad, really, how people could convince themselves of anything when the payoff was big enough. Victor let the silence hang for exactly 4 seconds, long enough to seem like he was considering seriously, not so long that doubt could creep in, before leaning forward with the expression of someone who'd just recognized destiny. "Carla, this could be perfect timing. I've got someone else looking at that same property, but if your nephew is serious, if he's actually ready to move on something like this, I could hold them off for a week while I put together a presentation for him. But I need you to understand something," He paused, taking both her hands now in a gesture that seemed protective, but was actually possessive. This opportunity won't last. The Atlanta market is exploding right now, and properties like this get snatched up daily. If Daniel is interested, we need to move fast, but we also need to move smart. I don't want him thinking his auntie brought him some random guy with a sketchy deal. I want to do this right, professional, everything documented and legitimate. The words were perfect, addressing concerns she hadn't even voiced yet, building trust by appearing to care about her reputation more than the money. Carla nodded eagerly, her eyes shining with visions of commissions and gratitude and finally being the one who made something big happen. So what do we do? How do we approach him? Victor released her hands and pulled out his phone with the smooth efficiency of someone closing a business deal, not setting up a con. Here's what we're going to do. I'm going to send you a complete investor packet, property details, financial projections, information about me and my track record, everything your nephew would need to make an informed decision. You take that to him, let him review it, and then we set up a meeting, the three of us, somewhere comfortable for him. I'll bring my attorney. He didn't have an attorney, but he had a college friend who owed him favors and could wear a suit convincingly for an hour. And we'll walk through everything transparently. No pressure, no rush, just information. If he's interested after seeing everything, great. If not, no hard feelings, and you still helped him by connecting him with a legitimate investment opportunity. Carla was nodding before he even finished, her mind already racing ahead to how she'd present this to Daniel, how she'd frame herself as the protective aunt who was looking out for his future. And Carla, Victor added, his voice dropping lower, more intimate. When this works out, when the lounge opens and the returns start coming in, you're not just going to be a connection. You're going to be a partner. I'm thinking 5% equity for facilitating this, plus the ambassador role we discussed. You'll finally have the life you deserve. The rest of the night passed in a blur of planning and champagne that Victor ordered on Carla's credit card while making it seem like his treat. He watched her transform before his eyes from a woman with a secret to a woman with a mission, her body language shifting from conspiratorial to confident as the alcohol and his validation worked their magic. He fed her lines she could use with Daniel, helped her rehearse how to present the opportunity, addressed every potential objection her nephew might raise with responses that sounded reasonable in the moment, but would fall apart under actual scrutiny. By midnight, Carla was texting her girlfriends that she couldn't make their after-party because she was handling some major business moves, and Victor knew he had her exactly where he needed her. Excited enough to be motivated, but not so excited that she'd spook the real target. As the club started, emptying out, Victor walked Carla to her car with his arm around her waist. A gesture that could be read as romantic or professional depending on who was watching, and kissed her cheek with just enough warmth to keep her invested, but not so much that it crossed lines that might complicate things later. "Call me after you talk to him," Victor said, opening her car door with the old-fashioned chivalry that women her age still appreciated. "And remember, we're not selling him anything. We're offering him an opportunity to multiply his success while being part of something bigger than himself. That's what smart money does. It works instead of sitting in a bank account losing value to inflation." Carla nodded, her eyes slightly glassy from alcohol and possibility, and Victor closed her door once she was safely inside, watching until her taillights disappeared down the parking garage ramp before allowing his smile to drop completely. He pulled out his phone and opened his notes app, where he kept detailed profiles of every mark he was working. Under Carla's name he typed, "Nephew Daniel Brooks, 29, software developer, $1 million plus liquid from app acquisition, no investment experience, trusts aunt completely. Timeline, 7 to 10 days maximum. Commission structure. Convince aunt she's getting 5% equity plus $10,000 monthly ambassador fee. Neither will materialize. Target investment, $1 million, settle for minimum $500,000 if he balks. Backup plan. If nephew seems too cautious, pivot to urgent opportunity closing narrative, create artificial scarcity." He read it twice, committed the key points to memory, then deleted the note entirely, a habit formed from his prison days when he'd learned that phones were evidence waiting to be discovered. Victor walked to his own car, a leased BMW that cost more per month than most people's mortgages, financed through a web of credit cards and manipulated credit reports that would eventually collapse, but not before he'd moved on to the next city, and sat in the driver's seat without starting the engine, allowing himself a moment of pure satisfaction. This was the part he lived for, Not the money itself, but the artistry of it. The way all the pieces were falling into place through nothing but words and performance and understanding human nature better than most therapists. Daniel Brooks was exactly the type of Mark Victor specialized in. Young, suddenly wealthy, probably overwhelmed, definitely inexperienced, and most importantly, emotionally connected to someone Victor had already compromised. The nephew would want to trust his aunt, would want to believe that investing was what smart people did with windfalls, would be vulnerable to the fear of being seen as naive or letting his money sit there doing nothing while others got rich. And if Daniel had any doubts, well, that's what the fake documents and the friend posing as lawyer and the carefully rehearsed presentation were for, layers of legitimacy that would satisfy a Google search but not an actual investigation. Because people who were already convinced rarely investigated deeply anyway. The drive back to his apartment, a studio in a building much less impressive than he led people to believe, gave Victor time to think through the variables and contingencies. He'd need to move quickly once Carla made contact with Daniel, before the nephew had time to do real research or talk to actual financial advisors. The key would be creating urgency without appearing desperate, building trust while maintaining mystery, offering transparency while controlling exactly what information was available to be transparent about. He'd done this dance dozens of times, and the steps were always the same. First meeting would be all personality and vision, making Daniel like him as a person before trusting him as an advisor. Second meeting would introduce the opportunity, with carefully calibrated numbers that seemed too good to ignore but not too good to be believed. Third meeting would be the close, where artificial deadlines and strategic social proof would push Daniel toward a decision before logic could interfere. Victor had 3 different versions of the con ready depending on how sophisticated Daniel seemed. If the nephew was truly naive, go big and take everything. If he was cautious, start smaller and build trust for a second round. If he seemed too smart, abort entirely and ghost Carla before any real damage was done. But something about this particular con felt different to Victor as he finally pulled into his apartment complex. Nothing he could articulate exactly, just a subtle instinct honed from years of operating in moral gray areas that had long since turned black. Maybe it was the amount involved, bigger than his usual scores, which meant bigger risks if something went wrong. Maybe it was Carla's genuine affection for her nephew, which could turn to rage if she ever realized she'd been used to hurt him. Or maybe it was the nagging awareness that Daniel, as a tech professional, might have resources and knowledge that could unravel Victor's carefully constructed lies faster than the middle-aged divorcees and aspiring entrepreneurs he usually targeted. These thoughts flickered through his mind for exactly 30 seconds before Victor dismissed them with the practiced ease of someone who'd long ago decided that other people's pain was not his responsibility, that the world was full of predators and prey, and he'd simply chosen which side of that equation he wanted to be on. He locked his BMW, rode the elevator to the 4th floor, and entered his sparsely furnished apartment, where the only expensive items were the clothes he wore like costumes and the laptop he used to create false realities. Victor spent the next 2 hours at his laptop, refining the investor packet he'd send Carla tomorrow, making sure every link worked, every logo looked legitimate, every projection seemed researched rather than invented. He'd stolen templates from real investment firms, borrowed language from actual prospectuses, created a website that would pass a basic background check, but would dissolve like smoke if anyone looked too closely at business registrations or tried to contact the references listed at the bottom. The property photos he'd used weren't fake. They were real locations he'd toured with zero intention or ability to acquire, but they photographed well, and the owners had no idea their buildings were starring in someone's con. He crafted an email to Carla that struck the perfect tone. Professional but not cold, excited but not desperate, emphasizing both the opportunity and the limited time frame, without explicitly saying the words that might trigger her nephew's skepticism. Carla, attached is everything Daniel needs to evaluate whether this opportunity aligns with his investment goals. Please let him know I'm available to answer any questions, and I'm holding the property offer until Friday. After that, I'll need to move forward with the other interested party. Looking forward to meeting the young man you speak so highly of. Best, Victor. As Victor finally closed his laptop at 2:47 a.m., he allowed himself one moment of honest self-reflection. Not guilt, he'd surgically removed that capacity years ago, but acknowledgement of what he was about to do. He was about to take $1 million from a 29-year-old who'd earned it through actual work and talent, using the trust of a family member as a weapon, leaving behind financial devastation and broken relationships that would never fully heal. Some part of him, buried deep beneath years of justifications and rationalizations, recognized this as evil in its purest form. Not the dramatic evil of violence or hatred, but the casual evil of someone who'd simply decided that other people's well-being was less important than his own comfort, that their dreams were worth less than his rent, that their trust was just another tool to be exploited and discarded. That part of him whispered that maybe this time he should stop, should ghost Carla and find an honest job, and start rebuilding something resembling a legitimate life. But Victor had learned long ago to silence that whisper, had trained himself to see marks not as people but as opportunities, had convinced himself that anyone stupid enough to fall for his cons deserved what they got, that the world was fundamentally unfair, and he was simply playing the hand he'd been dealt. He fell asleep that night the way he always did. Easily, dreamlessly, the sleep of someone who'd either made peace with their choices or had simply stopped allowing themselves to question those choices at all. Across town, Carla was lying awake in her own bed, her mind racing with possibilities and percentages, already mentally spending money she hadn't earned from a deal that didn't exist, texting her girlfriends about how her life was about to change, about how she'd always known something big was coming, about how she'd finally be able to stop pretending and start actually living the life she'd been performing for so long. And in his small apartment in a different part of Atlanta, Daniel Brooks slept peacefully, still innocent of what was coming, still trusting that his aunt's love was unconditional, still believing that the biggest challenge his money would bring was deciding how to invest it wisely, not realizing that the decision had already been made for him by two people who saw him not as a nephew or a person, but as an opportunity too profitable to ignore. The trap was set, the players were positioned, and the con was officially in motion. But here's what makes this story different from every other scam you've heard about. Daniel wasn't going to be a passive victim. What Victor didn't know, what he couldn't have known because it wasn't written in social media profiles or casual conversation, was that Daniel Brooks had survived childhood poverty by being observant, had built his career by noticing patterns others missed, and had learned from his father's betrayal that the people most likely to hurt you were the ones you'd never suspect. The instinct that had made Daniel uncomfortable during that conversation with Carla hadn't disappeared. It had just gone underground, waiting and watching. And in the next chapter, you're going to see how Daniel's initial excitement about sharing his success slowly transforms into suspicion as Carla's behavior becomes increasingly strange, as the investment opportunity she presents seems too perfect to be real, and as small inconsistencies start adding up into a pattern that Daniel's analytical mind won't be able to ignore. So here's my question for you. If someone you loved completely, someone who'd always supported you, suddenly started pushing you toward a major financial decision, would you trust your instincts or your history? Drop your answer in the comments, hit that like button. 3 days. That's all it took for Daniel's peaceful post-windfall existence to transform into something that felt increasingly like a trap disguised as an opportunity. It started innocently enough, Carla calling the morning after their conversation, her voice bright with excitement that seemed just slightly too rehearsed, asking if he'd be free for lunch because she had someone interesting she wanted him to meet. Daniel had agreed cautiously, curiosity mixing with that subtle unease he couldn't quite name. And by Tuesday afternoon he found himself sitting in a booth at the Capitol Grill, an upscale steakhouse in Buckhead he'd never have chosen himself, watching his aunt check her makeup for the 3rd time while they waited for this mysterious connection to arrive. Carla was dressed like she was attending a business merger. Navy blazer over a silk blouse, hair professionally styled, jewelry understated for once. And the transformation from club-hopping aunt to corporate professional was so complete it felt like watching someone wear a costume they'd practiced in but never quite fit naturally. "Now, Danny, I need you to keep an open mind about this," Carla said for what felt like the 10th time, her hands fidgeting with her napkin in a way that suggested nerves she was trying to hide beneath confidence. "Victor is a serious businessman. He's worked with some of the biggest names in Atlanta, and this opportunity he's putting together is exactly the kind of smart investment that could turn your million into 5 million in a couple years." Daniel nodded slowly, his analytical mind already cataloging red flags. The fact that his aunt had never mentioned anyone named Victor before 3 days ago, the way she kept overselling before he'd even met the man, the strange insistence that this meeting happened so quickly after Daniel had shared his news. "Auntie, I appreciate you thinking about me, but you know I'm going to need to do my own research on anything involving this kind of money, right?" I can't just jump into something based on a lunch meeting. Carla's smile tightened almost imperceptibly, and Daniel saw something flicker across her face. Was it annoyance? Fear? Before she recovered and patted his hand across the table. Victor Kane arrived exactly 15 minutes late, a calculated delay that made his entrance seem important without being disrespectful. The kind of power move Daniel recognized from countless articles about negotiation tactics. He cut an impressive figure approaching their table. Tall, perfectly tailored charcoal suit, confidence radiating from every deliberate step. The kind of man who looked like success whether or not he'd actually achieved it. "Carla, beautiful as always," Victor said warmly, kissing her cheek with familiar ease before turning to Daniel with an outstretched hand and a smile that was professionally calibrated to inspire trust. "And you must be Daniel. Your aunt hasn't stopped talking about you. Says you're some kind of tech genius. Victor Kane, pleasure to meet you." His handshake was firm but not aggressive, his eye contact direct but not intimidating, and Daniel found himself responding to the charm, even as his mind noted how perfectly performed it all seemed, like watching a politician work a room or a salesman close a deal. The lunch proceeded with the smooth efficiency of a choreographed performance, and Daniel became increasingly aware that he was watching a show designed specifically for his benefit. Victor ordered with the casual authority of someone who ate at places like this regularly, asked Daniel thoughtful questions about his app development process that suggested he'd done research, dropped names of tech companies and investors with the ease of someone genuinely connected, and most importantly, didn't mention anything about money or investment opportunities for the first 30 minutes. Instead, he talked about Atlanta's growth, about the intersection of technology and hospitality, about his own journey from humble beginnings in Boston. Or was it Baltimore? Daniel noticed the city changed once during the conversation, to working with private equity firms on transformative ventures. It was impressive in its way, this performance, except Daniel had spent years in startup pitch meetings and he recognized the patterns. The vague language that sounded specific, the name drops that couldn't be verified, the success stories that were always attributed to unnamed partners or NDAs that prevented details from being shared. "So here's what I'm building, and Daniel, this is where someone with your kind of liquid capital could really make an impact." Victor finally transitioned, pulling out an iPad with the smooth confidence of someone about to deliver a presentation they'd given 100 times. On the screen appeared a slick deck, professional graphics, charts with upward trending arrows, photos of a beautiful property that looked like it belonged in a luxury magazine. Lux Crypto Ventures. It's a hybrid concept. On one side, an exclusive membership lounge targeting Atlanta's professional and entertainment elite. Think somewhere between Soho House and a high-end social club. On the other side, a cryptocurrency investment fund that leverages the collective buying power of our members to access opportunities typically reserved for institutional investors. We're talking about bridging old money and new money, traditional networking with digital finance. Daniel watched the presentation carefully, his developer's eye noticing things. The stock photo aesthetic of some images, the way the financial projections seemed to follow a perfect exponential curve that never accounted for market volatility, the use of crypto, a field notorious for scams, as a central selling point. "Now, I'll be straight with you, Daniel, because Carla told me you're too smart for bullshit," Victor continued, and the strategic use of mild profanity was another calculated move to seem authentic, relatable. "This isn't a get-rich-quick scheme. I've got 3 other investors already committed, 2 former NFL players and a surgeon, putting in a combined $1.8 million. We're looking for one more founding investor to complete our initial capital raise of $3 million, which gives us enough to acquire the property, build out the space, and launch the fund. That founding investor gets 20% equity in the venture, preferred returns on the crypto fund, and most importantly, their ground floor on something that's positioned to be the premier destination for Atlanta's upper class." He swiped to a slide, showing the investment terms, and Daniel's mind immediately went to work. The numbers looked impressive on the surface, but they were also conveniently round, suspiciously perfect, and the projected returns, 300% in 18 months, were exactly the kind of promise that should make any legitimate investor run in the opposite direction. "What's the timeline on this?" Daniel asked, his tone neutral, giving nothing away, and he noticed both Carla and Victor lean forward almost imperceptibly at his question, the body language of salespeople sensing interest. "That's the thing," Victor said, and here came the urgency play Daniel had been waiting for. The property owner has given me until this Friday to either close or they're moving to another buyer. I've got everyone else's capital committed and sitting in escrow, but I need that final million to complete the deal. After Friday, the opportunity closes, and honestly, I'll probably just restructure with a larger percentage going to my other investors. It was textbook sales psychology. Create artificial scarcity, imply competition, make the mark feel like they're losing something rather than gaining something. Daniel had seen this exact approach from a dozen different directions. App marketing, timeshare presentations, even car salesmen. And it always meant the deal was either desperate or fraudulent. I understand, Daniel said slowly, watching Victor's face carefully. Can you send me the complete investment documents? I'd want my attorney to review everything before Friday's deadline. Something flickered across Victor's face, so quick that someone less observant might have missed it. A flash of calculation before the smooth smile returned. Absolutely, of course you'd want legal review. That's exactly what a smart investor does, he said, but Daniel noticed his hand tighten almost imperceptibly on his iPad. I'll have my assistant send over the complete packet tonight. Operating agreement, property purchase contract, fund structure documentation, everything. Just know that my attorney's office closes at noon on Friday, so if you want to move forward, we'd need your signature and wire transfer by 11 a.m. Friday morning at the latest. More urgency, more pressure, more artificial deadlines designed to prevent the one thing that would unravel this whole thing. Time to actually investigate. That's fine, Daniel said calmly, already knowing he wouldn't be wiring anything by Friday, but wanting to see how far this would go. Send everything over. I'll have my lawyer start reviewing tomorrow. Carla jumped in then, her voice higher than usual, almost nervous. Danny, this is really incredible opportunity, baby. Victor doesn't usually even consider investors under 5 million, but because you're my nephew and I vouched for you, he's making an exception. The rest of the lunch was a masterclass in deflection. Every question Daniel asked was answered with confident vagueness. Every request for specific information was met with promises to include it in the packet. Every attempt to drill down into details was redirected toward the big vision and transformative opportunity. Victor mentioned the NFL players by first name only, Marcus and Devin. Without last names, said the surgeon was out of Emory. Without specifying which department, claimed the property was in Midtown without giving an exact address because the seller wants to maintain privacy until closing. It was all smoke and mirrors, impressively constructed smoke and mirrors, but smoke nonetheless. When the check arrived, Victor made a show of reaching for it before allowing Daniel to insist on paying. A test, Daniel realized, to see how comfortable he was with spending significant money, a read on whether the $1 million was real or exaggerated. As they stood to leave, Victor handed Daniel a business card. Heavy cardstock, embossed lettering, every detail suggesting legitimacy, with his contact information and a website URL. Do your research, Daniel. Look me up, check out the company website, call my references. I want you comfortable with this, because I'm not interested in one-time investors. I'm building long-term partnerships with serious people. Standing outside the restaurant afterward, Carla hugged Daniel with what felt like desperation masked as affection, whispering in his ear. Baby, I know this seems fast, but this is your chance to set yourself up for life. Don't overthink it and miss out. I would never, ever steer you wrong. She pulled back, her eyes searching his face for commitment he wasn't ready to give, and Daniel saw something in her expression that made his stomach tighten. She wasn't just excited about this opportunity, she was invested in it, needed him to say yes in a way that went beyond wanting him to succeed financially. I'll review everything, Auntie, I promise, he said, carefully non-committal, and watched her face fall slightly before she recovered and kissed his cheek, her perfume overwhelming as always. Victor had already left in a black BMW that looked expensive but, Daniel noted, had a small dent in the back bumper and a temporary tag in the window. Details that didn't match the narrative of established success. As Daniel walked to his own car, his mind was already working through what he'd just witnessed, and the word that kept circling back was performance. Not business meeting but performance, not opportunity presentation but theatrical production, not legitimate investment but something else entirely. That evening, Daniel sat in his apartment with his laptop open and Victor Kane's business card lying on his desk like evidence in a crime not yet committed. His first instinct was to call his mother, tell her everything, get her perspective. But something stopped him. If this was legitimate, he'd look paranoid for doubting his aunt's recommendation. If it was a scam, He'd be exposing Carla's involvement to his mother before he had proof, potentially destroying their relationship over suspicion rather than facts. So instead, Daniel did what he did best. He started digging. Victor Kane's website was professional, polished, full of stock photos and aspirational language, but remarkably light on verifiable information. The About section had a biography that mentioned decades of investment experience, but didn't name a single specific company he'd worked for. The portfolio page showed photos of properties and businesses with vague captions like hospitality venture, Southeast region, and mixed-use development major metropolitan area. Nothing that could be verified, nothing with addresses or names that could be cross-referenced. Daniel tried searching for Lux Crypto Ventures and found the website registered just 6 weeks ago through a privacy service that hid the owner's identity. He searched for Victor Kane plus various keywords: investment, private equity, Atlanta, Boston, Baltimore, and found nothing except a few generic LinkedIn profiles that didn't match the man he'd met today. The deeper Daniel dug, the more conspicuous the absences became. Victor Kane had no meaningful digital footprint. No college alumni associations, no professional organization memberships, no articles or press releases mentioning his name in connection with any legitimate deals. For someone claiming to have worked in private equity for 20 years, this was impossible. Even junior analysts left traces: conference attendance, deal announcements, LinkedIn connections to verified companies. But Victor existed only in the materials he'd created himself. The website, a bare-bones LinkedIn profile with no endorsements and 23 connections, a Twitter account that had been opened 3 months ago and consisted entirely of retweets of generic business advice. Daniel pulled up the property photos from Victor's presentation and did a reverse image search. One of them appeared on a real estate listing for a building in downtown Atlanta, but the listing showed it was under contract to a hotel chain, not available for purchase. Another photo was watermarked by an architectural firm and appeared in their portfolio as a project they'd designed for a completely different client in Nashville. The photos were real, but they had nothing to do with Victor's supposed venture. Daniel's phone buzzed with a text from Carla. "Did Victor send over the documents yet? Make sure you read through them tonight, baby. Time is tight." The emojis felt wrong, forced, like someone trying to. Hard to seem casual about something that clearly wasn't casual to them. He texted back, "Not yet, I'll check my email." "Auntie, can I ask, how long have you known Victor?" 3 minutes passed, and Daniel could see the 3 dots indicating she was typing, stopping, typing again. Finally, "A few weeks, but baby, sometimes you just know when you meet quality people. He's the real deal, trust me. Have I ever steered you wrong?" That message landed in Daniel's chest like a weight, because yes, she had steered him wrong. Multiple times actually, with her various business ideas and connections that never panned out. But those had always been small things, harmless things, the ambitious dreams of someone who wanted more than they had. This was different. This was his entire fortune on the line, and her insistence despite having known Victor for only weeks was its own kind of red flag. At 9:15 p.m., an email arrived from an address that looked official, assistant@luxacryptoventures.com. with the subject line, investment documentation for Daniel Brooks. Daniel opened it cautiously, half expecting malware, but found instead a professionally formatted email and 3 PDF attachments: operating agreement, property purchase contract, and fund prospectus. The email was brief and professional, signed by someone named Jennifer Martinez, who identified herself as Victor's executive assistant, and it included a deadline reminder. Please note that all executed documents and wire transfer must be completed by 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time on Friday, December 22nd, to secure your position as a founding investor. Daniel downloaded the PDFs and immediately noticed something odd. The metadata showed they'd all been created today at 6:47 p.m., less than 3 hours ago, using a free PDF creation tool rather than professional legal software. For documents that supposedly represented months of legal work and involved multiple existing investors, this was impossible. Real investment contracts went through revisions, had earlier creation dates, showed evidence of actual legal review. Daniel began reading through the documents with the methodical attention he'd used debugging code, and within 20 minutes he'd identified at least a dozen glaring problems. The operating agreement referenced a Delaware LLC, but didn't include the actual registration number. The property purchase contract listed a building address in Midtown, but when Daniel pulled it up on Google Maps, the address didn't exist. The numbers skipped from 425 to 445 with number 435 in between. The fund prospectus included financial projections that violated basic mathematical logic. The returns promised required market conditions that hadn't existed since before the 2008 crash, and even then only for illegal Ponzi schemes. Most damningly, the signature pages showed the other investors: Marcus Williams, Devin Jackson, and Dr. Robert Chin. But when Daniel searched those names, he found that Marcus Williams was a common name with hundreds of LinkedIn profiles. Devin Jackson was a fictional character from a TV show, and Dr. Robert Chin was a medical school professor who'd been dead for 2 years according to his university's memorial page. Daniel sat back in his chair, the reality of what he was looking at settling over him like ice water. This wasn't just a questionable investment opportunity or an overly optimistic pitch. This was an elaborate, premeditated scam, and his aunt was either a willing participant or a victim being used to access him. The sophistication of it was almost impressive in a horrifying way. The fake documents, the stolen property photos, the website, the business cards, the confident performance at lunch, all of it designed to exploit the exact psychology of someone who'd just come into money and didn't know what to do with it. But what made Daniel's stomach turn wasn't Victor Kane's criminal creativity. It was the image of Aunt Carla at that restaurant table, pushing so hard, so desperately, her eyes pleading with him to say yes. Was she in on it? Had she and Victor planned this together, plotting how to extract his money while pretending to care about his future? Or had Victor manipulated her too, used her feelings for Daniel as a weapon against both of them, convinced her that she was helping her nephew while actually delivering him to slaughter? Daniel's phone buzzed again, Carla calling this time, not texting. He stared at her name on the screen, her contact photo showing her laughing at some family barbecue from years ago when things were simpler, and he felt something break inside his chest that might have been trust or might have been the naive belief that family meant something more than biology and shared history. He didn't answer. Instead, he screenshot every page of Victor's fake documents, saved every email, bookmarked every search result that proved the investment was fraudulent, building a case not for the police yet, but for his own understanding, for the confrontation he knew was coming, for the moment when he'd have to look his aunt in the face and ask her directly whose side she was really on. The phone stopped ringing, and immediately a voicemail notification appeared. Daniel didn't listen to it. He couldn't, not yet, because once he heard whatever excuse or pressure or manipulation she'd recorded, he'd have to decide what to do next, and he wasn't ready for that decision. What Daniel needed was advice from someone he could trust absolutely, someone with the technical skills to help him verify what he was seeing and the loyalty to keep it confidential while he figured out his next move. He pulled up his contacts and found Marcus Chin, his college roommate, now a cybersecurity analyst for a financial firm, the guy who'd taught Daniel half of what he knew about coding and who'd once helped him trace a phishing scam targeting their dorm. They hadn't talked in a few weeks, but Daniel knew Marcus would answer, and more importantly, Marcus would understand both the technical and emotional complexity of what Daniel had just discovered. The phone rang twice before Marcus picked up. "Yo, Danny. Man, I was just thinking about you, saw Tech Ventures' acquisition announcement, and recognized the app description. That's your SyncFlow joint, right? Bro, congratulations. You must be swimming in champagne and celebration right now." Daniel's voice came out flatter than he intended. "Marcus, I need your help with something. Can you come over? Like tonight? I think someone's trying to rob me, and I'm pretty sure my aunt is helping them do it." The silence on the other end of the line lasted 3 full seconds, Marcus processing, recalculating, switching from celebration mode to crisis mode, before he responded. "I'm grabbing my laptop. Text me your address again. I'll be there in 30 minutes. Daniel felt relief wash over him for the first time since lunch. The feeling of not being alone in this anymore, of having someone in his corner who didn't want anything from him except friendship. He texted his address, then spent the next 30 minutes organizing all his evidence into a single folder on his desktop, creating a timeline of events starting from when he'd told Carla about his windfall to this evening's document review, preparing to walk Marcus through everything step by step. As he worked, his phone kept buzzing. 3 more texts from Carla, each one escalating in urgency. "Baby, call me back." Then, "Danny, I'm worried, did you get the documents?" And finally, "Please don't shut me out. I know this seems sudden, but I promise you can trust Victor. Just call me so we can talk this through." Each message felt like evidence of something. But Daniel still couldn't tell whether it was evidence of guilt or evidence of her own victimization. Marcus arrived 27 minutes later, his laptop bag slung over his shoulder and an energy drink in his hand, his expression serious in a way Daniel had rarely seen. They didn't waste time on pleasantries. Daniel walked him through everything: the lunch meeting, the fake documents, the reverse image searches, the impossible financial projections, the dead investor. While Marcus listened with the intense focus of someone analyzing a security breach, occasionally stopping Daniel to ask technical questions or request screenshots. When Daniel finished, Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his fingers already flying across his laptop keyboard as he started running his own searches, his cybersecurity tools digging deeper than Google ever could. Okay, so first thing, this is definitely a scam, like textbook advance fee fraud mixed with some affinity scam elements, Marcus said without looking up from his screen. But the question we need to answer is whether your aunt knows it's a scam. Because if she does, she's a co-conspirator. If she doesn't, she's being used as what we call a money mule or confidence intermediary. Someone the scammer manipulates into recruiting Marks on their behalf. Marcus looked up from his laptop with an expression that made Daniel's blood run cold. Danny, I need to show you something. I ran Victor Kane's name through some databases I have access to through work. Don't ask me how, just know it's technically legal but definitely against company policy. And I got a hit. Your boy Victor Kane isn't his real name. His real name is Victor Alejandro Batista, and he's got a criminal record in 3 states. Wire fraud in Florida, identity theft in Illinois, and investment fraud in California. He did 38 months in federal prison and got out on parole 4 years ago. The reason you couldn't find any legitimate background on him is because everything about him is constructed. The name, the history, the credentials, all of it. Marcus turned his laptop around so Daniel could see the mugshot on the screen. The same face from lunch, but younger, harder, wearing an orange jumpsuit instead of a tailored suit, his eyes holding the same cold calculation that had flickered during their conversation. And here's the thing that's really going to hurt. I found communications between Victor, or Batista, whatever we're calling him, and your aunt's phone number in some metadata I pulled from that website. They've been texting for 3 weeks, and the pattern suggests. Marcus paused, clearly not wanting to say it. Suggests what, Marcus? Daniel's voice was barely above a whisper. Marcus met his eyes with sympathy and certainty. Suggests she knew who he really was, or at minimum, knew enough to know this wasn't legitimate, but chose to push forward anyway. I'm sorry, man. The communications start right after she met him, and they spike dramatically the day after you told her about your money. She's been feeding him information about you, your financial situation, your personality, what approach would work best. This isn't her being tricked, Danny. This is her actively participating. The words hung in the air between them like a verdict, and Daniel felt something fundamental shift in his understanding of his family, his relationships, his judgment of people. The aunt who'd believed in him, who'd slipped him money when he was broke, who'd bragged about his skills to anyone who'd listen. That person had looked at his success and seen not pride but opportunity, had met a con artist in a nightclub, and decided that his love and trust was worth exactly whatever percentage Victor had promised her. So here's what I need you to understand before we move to Chapter 4. Daniel isn't going to cry, isn't going to fall apart, isn't going to become a passive victim of this betrayal. What he's going to do is something far more interesting. He's going to turn the tables. Because what Victor and Carla don't know is that Daniel spent 3 years building an app that literally tracks and predicts user behavior. That his entire skill set is based on finding patterns and exploiting them, and that the analytical mind that made him a millionaire is now focused entirely on destroying the people trying to rob him. Drop a comment right now and tell me, would you confront your aunt immediately, or would you play along and set a trap? Because what Daniel decides to do next is going to surprise everyone, including the people who thought they had him figured out. Revenge is a dish best served with evidence, documentation, and a plan so airtight that your enemies don't realize they're caught until the trap has already closed. Daniel sat in Marcus's car at 2 a.m. outside a 24-hour diner in East Atlanta, both of them running on caffeine and righteous anger, and made a decision that would change everything. He wasn't going to report Victor to the police, wasn't going to confront Carla with tears and accusations, wasn't going to play the victim and hope the system would protect him. Instead, he was going to do what he did best. He was going to build something, a carefully constructed counter-operation that would expose both Victor and Carla publicly, definitively, and most importantly, in a way that would prevent them from ever doing this to anyone else. "I want to give them what they're asking for," Daniel said, watching Marcus nearly choke on his coffee. "Not the money, obviously, but the appearance of it. I want to pretend I'm falling for the scam, string them along, make them think they're winning right up until the moment I pull the rug out and destroy them both in front of everyone." Marcus stared at Daniel for a long moment, his analytical mind clearly running through scenarios and risk assessments, before a slow smile spread across his face. The kind of smile that suggested he'd been hoping Daniel would say exactly that. "Okay, I'm in. But if we're doing this, we're doing it right. No half measures, no improvisation, no room for them to wriggle out when it all comes down. We build a perfect case, we gather irrefutable evidence, and we choose the moment of maximum impact to expose them." He pulled out a notebook, old school, nothing digital that could be hacked or traced, and started sketching out a plan. "First, you need to respond to those documents like you're cautiously interested, but still doing due diligence. Ask smart questions that make you seem sophisticated, but not suspicious. String them along past their fake Friday deadline. Make them desperate enough to make mistakes. Meanwhile, I'll dig deeper into Victor's background, find out if there are other victims, map out his entire operation. And we need to figure out exactly how deep Carla is in this. Is she getting a commission? Is she a full partner? Is she in love with this guy? What's her motivation?" They spent the next 3 hours in that diner parking lot building what Marcus called Operation Reversal. A 3-phase plan that would require Daniel to become an actor as skilled as Victor, lying to his aunt's face while secretly documenting every conversation, every pressure tactic, every moment where she chose deception over family. Phase 1 was the performance. Daniel would respond to the investment documents with careful interest, ask for a deadline extension citing his attorney's schedule, agree to a second meeting with Victor, where he'd wear a hidden recording device Marcus would provide. The goal was to get Victor on tape making promises that were provably fraudulent, admitting to details that would demonstrate intent to defraud, and most importantly, to get Carla on record actively participating in the manipulation, rather than just being a passive messenger. "The thing about con artists," Marcus explained, typing notes into an encrypted file on his laptop, "is that they're so confident in their performance that they get sloppy when they think they're winning. If we make Victor believe you're about to wire the money, he'll drop his guard, maybe even brag about how smart he is, give us exactly what we need to bury him." Phase 2 was the investigation. While Daniel played along, Marcus would use his cybersecurity skills to build an airtight case against Victor. This meant tracing Victor's digital footprint beyond what simple Google searches revealed, finding his real social media accounts, identifying other potential victims through pattern analysis of similar scams, accessing public records to map out his criminal history, and most critically, trying to determine if there was a larger operation behind him or if he was working alone. "Guys like this rarely work in isolation," Marcus said, showing Daniel search results for similar scams in Atlanta over the past year. "There's usually a network, people who create fake documents, people who rent mailboxes and create shell companies, people who provide fake references. If we can identify his whole crew, we can take down more than just Victor. We can disrupt an entire criminal operation." Daniel felt the scope of what they were attempting to settle over him. This wasn't just about protecting his money anymore. It was about justice, about preventing the next victim, about using his skills and resources to fight back against people who made a living exploiting trust. Phase 3 was the trap. Once they had irrefutable evidence, and ideally had caught Victor in multiple recorded lies, Daniel would arrange a final meeting. Not in a private office or quiet restaurant where Victor controlled the environment, but somewhere public, somewhere with witnesses, somewhere Victor wouldn't expect to be confronted. Marcus suggested the Apex nightclub, the same place where Victor had met Carla, where he felt confident and powerful, where his entire performance had begun. "We expose him in his own territory, in front of the crowd he uses as cover, and we do it in a way that's so public and so documented that he can't spin it or disappear or claim it was a misunderstanding. We invite Carla, we invite anyone else we can identify as potential victims or accomplices, and we present everything, the criminal record, the fake documents, the recorded conversations, in a way that's undeniable." The image of it made Daniel's pulse quicken. Walking into the Apex not as a victim, but as someone who'd turned the tables, watching Victor's face as he realized the mark had become the hunter, seeing Carla understand that her betrayal hadn't just failed, but had destroyed her relationship with her family permanently and publicly. But before any of that could happen, Daniel had to respond to Carla and Victor in a way that seemed natural, that didn't raise suspicion, that bought him the time he needed to prepare. As dawn started breaking over Atlanta, Marcus helped Daniel craft the perfect response email to Victor's assistant Jennifer. Thank you for sending the investment documents. I've reviewed them with great interest, and I'm very excited about the opportunity. However, my attorney is out of town until Monday and won't be able to review everything until Tuesday morning. Would it be possible to extend the deadline to Tuesday, December 26th for final execution? I understand this may complicate your timeline with the property seller, but I want to make sure we do this right and I'm protected legally. Looking forward to discussing further. Best, Daniel Brooks. The email struck the perfect balance. Enthusiastic enough to keep them engaged, cautious enough to seem reasonable, and most importantly, it bought Daniel 4 extra days to prepare his counter-operation while making Victor sweat about whether the deal was slipping away. Marcus pressed send before Daniel could second-guess himself, and immediately Daniel's phone started buzzing. Carla calling at 6 a.m., which meant she'd either been up all night waiting or had some alert set for activity related to the investment. Daniel looked at Marcus, who nodded, and answered on speakerphone. Danny, baby, I just woke up and was thinking about you. Wondering if you got those documents last night. Her voice was bright, artificially cheerful in that way that suggested she was performing even though she didn't know Marcus was listening. Yeah, I got them, Auntie. They look interesting. I just sent an email asking about extending the deadline a few days so my lawyer can review everything properly. The silence that followed lasted a beat too long, and Daniel could practically hear Carla recalculating her approach on the other end. Oh, well, baby, the thing is Victor was very clear that Friday is the absolute deadline. The property owner won't wait any longer than that, and Victor has other investors who could step in if you need more time. It was pure pressure tactics, exactly what Marcus had predicted, and hearing it so blatantly made Daniel's jaw tighten. I understand the timeline is tight, Auntie, but this is $1 million, Daniel said carefully, letting a hint of frustration creep into his voice. Not at her, but at the situation, playing the role of someone torn between opportunity and caution. I can't just wire that kind of money without legal review. If Victor's deal is as solid as you say, for extra days shouldn't matter. My lawyer can rush the review, but Tuesday is the absolute earliest. He heard Carla cover the phone and have a muffled conversation with someone. Victor, clearly in her bedroom at 6 a.m., which answered one question about their relationship. When she came back on the line, her voice had shifted to something more manipulative, more emotional. Danny, baby, I understand you're being careful, and I love that about you, but sometimes in life you have to take calculated risks. This is one of those moments. I wouldn't push you if I wasn't absolutely certain this was legitimate. You trust me, don't you? Haven't I always looked out for you? The manipulation was so naked, so obvious, that Daniel had to close his eyes against the anger rising in his chest. Marcus grabbed a notepad and scribbled, "Keep pressing but agree to compromise," and held it up for Daniel to see. Auntie, of course I trust you, Daniel said, the lie tasting like poison in his mouth. And I want to do this deal. Tell you what, can I meet with you and Victor again this weekend? Saturday, maybe? I want to go through some of the numbers with him directly, ask some questions about the exit strategy and fund management. If I feel good after that conversation, maybe we can figure out a way to move forward, even before my lawyer finishes their review. He heard Carla's relief through the phone, almost felt Victor's satisfaction at successfully manipulating the deadline pressure. Yes, baby, that's perfect. Saturday, let me text Victor and set it up. Maybe we can meet at his office, somewhere more private where you can really dig into the details. Daniel exchanged a look with Marcus, who shook his head emphatically. Actually, what about somewhere comfortable, maybe lunch again? I think better when I'm not in a formal office setting. Carla agreed quickly, too quickly, and they settled on Saturday at 1 p.m. at a different restaurant. This one Daniel chose deliberately because Marcus knew the owner and could arrange for them to sit in a specific booth where a hidden camera could be easily positioned. After Daniel hung up, he and Marcus sat in silence for a moment, processing what had just happened. She's in love with him, Marcus finally said, stating what they'd both heard in Carla's voice. Or at least infatuated enough that she's convinced herself this is all legitimate, that she's not betraying you but helping you. That's going to make the exposure harder, because she's not going to see herself as the villain. Daniel felt the complicated weight of that truth, that his aunt probably believed her own rationalizations, had constructed a narrative where she was the hero connecting her brilliant nephew with an incredible opportunity, where her relationship with Victor was romantic rather than transactional, where the percentages Victor had promised her weren't payment for betrayal, but compensation for her valuable contributions. "I don't care about her feelings anymore," Daniel said, and was surprised to find he mostly meant it. "She made her choice when she started feeding him information about me. Whatever happens to her now is consequences, not cruelty." The next 2 days were surreal. Daniel going through the motions of his normal life, while secretly preparing to destroy his aunt and her con artist boyfriend. He went to his actual lawyer and asked hypothetical questions about investment fraud without revealing the real situation. He researched Georgia's laws on recording conversations and discovered he was in a one-party consent state, meaning he could legally record any conversation he was part of without the other person's knowledge. He worked with Marcus to test the recording equipment they'd use Saturday, a device that looked like a normal pen but contained a high-quality audio recorder, plus a button camera Marcus had acquired through his security work that would capture video without being obvious. Most difficultly, Daniel had to maintain normal communication with Carla, responding to her increasingly frequent texts with enthusiasm he didn't feel, pretending excitement about Saturday's meeting while actually preparing to document every lie Victor told and every moment Carla supported those lies. Marcus's investigation into Victor uncovered disturbing patterns that made Daniel's resolve even stronger. Using various databases and some techniques Marcus admitted were legally gray, they found at least 4 other potential victims in Atlanta alone. An older widow who'd lost $300,000 to a luxury senior living investment Victor had pitched. A young athlete who'd been saved only because his financial advisor intervened before he wired money to a sports memorabilia business. A salon owner who'd borrowed $50,000 against her business to invest in a franchise opportunity that never materialized, and a church pastor who'd nearly convinced his congregation to pool funds for a community development project Victor was supposedly managing. In every case, the pattern was identical. Victor cultivated a relationship with someone who had access to money or could access money through their network, created urgency through artificial deadlines, provided professional-looking but fake documentation, and disappeared the moment real scrutiny began. What made it worse was that many victims never reported the crimes, either out of embarrassment or because Victor was skilled at structuring the scams so the money appeared to be invested rather than stolen, making legal recourse complicated. "This guy is a professional predator," Marcus said, showing Daniel a timeline he'd constructed. "He cycles through Atlanta for 8 to 12 months, hits enough marks to make decent money, then typically relocates before law enforcement connects the dots or parole officers catch up with him. The fact that he's still here after 8 months and going for your 7-figure score suggests this is his exit play. One big con to set him up before he disappears to the next city." Daniel studied the timeline, noting how Victor had refined his approach with each victim, learning from mistakes, adapting his story to different marks. The widow had been pitched real estate, the athlete got a sports business angle, the salon owner heard about franchise opportunities. Victor was a chameleon, becoming whatever his mark needed him to be. "We need to contact these people," Daniel said suddenly. "Not to interview them or anything that might spook Victor, but to have them ready as witnesses when we expose him. If it's not just me accusing him but multiple victims coming forward simultaneously, he can't dismiss it as a misunderstanding or a personal dispute." Marcus reached out to 2 of the victims through indirect channels. A professional inquiry that didn't reveal details but gauged their willingness to talk about their experiences with someone matching Victor's description. The widow, Mrs. Patricia Thornton, responded within hours, and her email made Daniel's blood boil. "I don't know who Victor Kane really is, but I know he's still operating in Atlanta, and I pray every day that someone stops him before he destroys another family like he destroyed mine. I lost my husband's life insurance money believing that man's promises. I'll help however I can." The athlete Cameron Mitchell was more cautious but agreed to a phone call where he told Marcus, "My financial advisor saved me, but barely. I was 24 hours from wiring $200,000 to an account that would have disappeared. If you're building a case against this dude, count me in. People need to know what he is." Having real victims ready to corroborate the pattern transformed Operation Reversal from personal revenge into something larger, something that felt like genuine justice. Friday evening, Daniel received an email from Victor directly, not his assistant this time, which itself was telling. Daniel, looking forward to our conversation tomorrow. I wanted to give you a heads up that I've had to push back the other interested investor because I believe you're the right partner for this venture. However, I can only hold the property until Tuesday as you requested. My attorneys have prepared an amended operating agreement that addresses some of the due diligence questions you raised, and I'll bring a certified property appraisal to our meeting tomorrow. I respect your caution. It shows you're a serious investor. That's exactly the kind of partner I want in this venture. See you tomorrow at 1 p.m. Victor. The email was masterful manipulation, praising Daniel's caution while creating more urgency, offering additional proof, while actually just providing more fake documents, positioning Victor as the reasonable professional and Daniel as the valued partner. Marcus read it over Daniel's shoulder and whistled low. He's good. I mean, he's evil, but he's really good at this. That email is designed to make you feel guilty about being suspicious. That night, Daniel barely slept, running through scenarios in his mind. What questions he'd ask, how he'd react to Victor's answers, how he'd keep his face neutral when Carla pushed him toward wiring the money, how he'd manage to appear convinced while actually gathering evidence. The recording equipment sat on his nightstand. The pen and the button camera, small devices that would capture everything. Marcus had tested them multiple times, ensuring the audio was clear and the video was high quality enough to be admissible if they needed to involve law enforcement. The plan was for Daniel to wear a casual button-down shirt where the camera could be positioned to capture both Victor and Carla without being obvious, and to take extensive notes with the pen recorder, a natural behavior that wouldn't raise suspicion. Marcus would be nearby in the restaurant, sitting at a separate table with his laptop, monitoring the recording in real time and ready to intervene if anything went wrong. If Victor became aggressive, if Daniel's cover was blown, if the situation escalated in unexpected ways. Saturday morning arrived with the weight of inevitability. Daniel showered, dressed carefully in the shirt Marcus had prepared with the button camera perfectly positioned, tested the recording equipment one final time, and drove to the restaurant with his heart pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat. The restaurant was called Harvest, upscale Southern cuisine, the kind of place where business deals and celebrations happened, where the noise level and ambient music would help mask any electronic interference from the recording equipment. Marcus was already there, seated 3 tables away with a perfect sightline to the booth where Daniel would sit, his laptop open as if he was just another professional working through lunch. They made eye contact briefly, Marcus giving the smallest nod, and Daniel felt marginally less alone. The booth itself was perfect, semicircular leather seating that would force everyone to sit close together, ensuring the camera and recorder would capture everything, with Daniel positioned so he could see both Carla and Victor, while they couldn't easily see what his hands were doing below the table level. Carla arrived first, 15 minutes early, dressed like she was closing a corporate merger. Tailored pantsuit, understated jewelry, hair professionally styled, the full performance of legitimacy and success. She hugged Daniel tightly, and he caught the scent of expensive perfume mixed with anxiety sweat. "You look good, baby. You ready for this? This is going to change your life," she said, and Daniel wondered if she believed her own words or if she was just that committed to the performance. "I'm ready, Auntie." Little nervous about moving this much money, but excited. He watched her face carefully, looking for cracks in the facade, for any hint that she might be having second thoughts or feeling guilty, but saw only determination and something that looked disturbingly like pride, as if she genuinely believed she was doing something good for him. Victor arrived exactly on time, projecting the confidence of someone who thought he'd already won, carrying a leather portfolio that presumably contained more fake documents designed to overcome Daniel's final objections. "Daniel, good to see you again," Victor said with perfectly calibrated enthusiasm, shaking Daniel's hand firmly before sliding into the booth on his other side, effectively boxing Daniel between them. A subtle intimidation tactic that probably worked on less observant Marks. "I've got everything you asked for, updated financials, the independent property appraisal, references from my other investors who've agreed to speak with you. I want you to feel completely comfortable with this decision because we're not just talking about one investment, we're talking about the beginning of a long partnership." Victor opened his portfolio with the flourish of a magician revealing a trick, and Daniel leaned forward with what he hoped looked like eager interest while his finger discreetly activated the recording pen. "That's exactly what I needed to hear," Daniel said. "Walk me through the numbers one more time, especially the projected returns." I want to understand exactly how you're getting to a 300% return in 18 months, because that seems incredible, in a good way, but also kind of too good, you know. Victor launched into his explanation with the smooth confidence of someone who'd delivered this pitch dozens of times, and Daniel noticed something fascinating. The story had evolved since their first meeting. Details had been added to address concerns Daniel had only thought about, not vocalized. So the 300% return is actually conservative based on our modeling, Victor began, and Daniel's internal bullshit detector went into overdrive. Here's how it breaks down. The lounge itself generates revenue through membership fees. We're targeting 500 members at $10,000 annually. That's $5 million in recurring revenue just from access. Add in the food and beverage profits, event hosting, and partnerships with luxury brands, and the lounge conservatively does $8 to $10 million in annual revenue with a 40% profit margin. That's $3 to $4 million in profits annually from the hospitality side alone. He pointed to charts that showed perfectly ascending growth curves. No seasonality, no market downturns, just beautiful fantasy dressed up as business planning. And then there's the crypto fund side, which is where the real multiplication happens, Victor continued, warming to his subject with an enthusiasm that would have been infectious if Daniel didn't know it was all fabricated. We pool investor capital with member contributions to access exclusive token pre-sales and DeFi opportunities that typically require minimum investments of $5 to $10 million. These opportunities can deliver 10 to 20 times returns on successful projects. Even with a conservative success rate, say 3 out of 10 investments hit big, you're looking at massive portfolio appreciation. Combined with the cash flow from the lounge operations, your $1 million investment conservatively becomes $3 to $4 million in 18 months. Possibly more if we hit on a breakout crypto project. It sounded almost plausible the way Victor told it, which was exactly what made him dangerous. He understood just enough about real business and legitimate cryptocurrency to make his fantasies seem achievable, but not enough to notice that the numbers violated basic economic principles and that the combination of hospitality and crypto was actually a red flag suggesting he couldn't decide which scam would be more believable, so he'd combined both. So here's what you need to understand about this moment. Daniel was sitting in that booth listening to Victor spin elaborate lies while his aunt nodded along enthusiastically, and he realized something profound. People like Victor succeeded not because their marks were stupid, but because they told people what they desperately wanted to hear, using just enough real business terminology to sound legitimate. If Daniel hadn't done his research, if he hadn't found Victor's criminal record, if Marcus hadn't revealed the pattern of previous victims, he might have actually convinced himself this was legitimate, because Victor was that good at his performance. But Daniel knew the truth, and watching Victor lie with such polished confidence while Carla sat there either complicit or hopelessly manipulated filled Daniel with a cold fury that he channeled into appearing more convinced, more interested, more ready to hand over his fortune. Are you starting to see how easy it is to fall for something like this when it's delivered by someone charismatic and backed by someone you love? Daniel sat in that booth for another 90 minutes, asking questions that sounded increasingly convinced while actually designed to get Victor to make more specific, more provably false claims. He asked about the other investors by name and watched Victor describe Marcus Williams and Devin Jackson with impressive fictional detail. Marcus was supposedly a defensive lineman who'd played for the Falcons 3 years ago and was now focused on building generational wealth through smart investments. Devin was a former tech executive at Microsoft who'd moved to Atlanta to escape Seattle's tech bubble and was looking for ground floor opportunities. Every word was a lie, and Daniel's recording equipment captured all of it while he nodded along as if he was taking Victor's word as gospel instead of documenting evidence for his destruction. "Can I meet Marcus and Devin before I commit?" Daniel asked, the question so reasonable that Victor couldn't refuse without raising suspicion. So he did what con artists always do. He agreed while creating conditions that made the meeting impossible. "Absolutely, I can arrange that. Unfortunately, Marcus is in Europe right now doing some scouting for another venture, and Devin is dealing with a family emergency in Seattle, but they'll both be back next week. Here's what I can do. I can have them both join a video call with us on Tuesday morning before the deadline. How's that?" It was perfect deflection. Promising something while making sure the timeline prevented it from happening, and if Daniel somehow pushed for the meeting, Victor could simply have associates play the roles on a video call, banking on Daniel not being sophisticated enough to verify identities in real time. "That works," Daniel said, already knowing he wouldn't need that meeting because by Tuesday morning Victor would be dealing with much bigger problems than Daniel's due diligence. Then Carla made her move, the one Daniel had been both expecting and dreading. She turned to him with emotion in her eyes that looked genuine even if her motives weren't, and took his hand in both of hers. "Danny, baby, I know this is scary, I know it's a lot of money, but this is your shot. This is the universe giving you an opportunity to not just be comfortable, but to be truly wealthy, to build something that can take care of your mama, that can let you retire young, that can change your whole family's future. And baby, I'm going to be part of this with you. Victor's already agreed to give me an ambassador role. So we'll be partners, we'll build this together. You're not alone in this." Her voice cracked slightly on the last sentence, and Daniel genuinely couldn't tell if she believed her own words or if she was just that committed to the manipulation. Either way, hearing his mother invoked as a reason to hand money to a con artist made Daniel want to stand up and walk out, but instead he squeezed her hands back and said, "I know, Auntie. I trust you. You've always looked out for me." The conversation shifted to logistics, and this was where Victor revealed either overconfidence or desperation. He walked Daniel through the exact process for wiring the money, providing account numbers and routing information that Marcus would later use to trace the accounts back to shell companies and potentially identify Victor's entire operation. "So Tuesday morning, you'll wire the funds to the escrow account I've set up with my attorneys." Victor slid a paper across the table with wire transfer instructions. "And simultaneously, we'll execute the operating agreement. My lawyers have a notary on staff who can witness everything, make it completely legitimate and binding. Then Wednesday we close on the property, and by next week we're starting build-out. You'll be receiving monthly updates on construction progress, financial statements, everything transparent." Daniel photographed the wire transfer instructions with his phone, ostensibly to save them but actually to preserve evidence, and noticed the account was at a small bank in Delaware. A detail that would make it easier to trace and potentially freeze once law enforcement got involved. "What happens if something goes wrong?" Daniel asked, the question designed to sound like reasonable caution, but actually crafted to get Victor to make false assurances about protections that didn't exist. "What if the property deal falls through, or the returns don't materialize as projected, or, I don't know, what if you die or something? What protections do I have?" Victor's smile never wavered, which was itself impressive. "Everything is structured through an LLC with a clear operating agreement that protects all investors. If the property deal falls through, which it won't because we've already got a purchase agreement signed, your money stays in escrow and returns to you minus any actual costs incurred, which would be minimal. As for returns, we've been conservative in our projections specifically to underpromise and overdeliver. And if something happens to me, the operating agreement names a successor manager. Actually, that would be Marcus Williams, the NFL player, who steps in and continues operations. You're protected from every angle." Every word was designed to sound reassuring while actually meaning nothing, and Daniel's recorder captured it all. An hour into the meeting, Daniel felt Victor shift tactics from building trust to closing the deal. The pressure increasing subtly but unmistakably, the way a pot of water goes from warm to boiling without a clear moment of transition. "So Daniel, I need to know, are you in? Because I've got my other investor ready to step up if you need more time. And honestly, at this point, every day we delay is money we're losing on the property. The seller has already given us 2 extensions, and my reputation is on the line promising them we'll close. I believe you're the right partner for this, Carla believes it, but I need to know you believe it too." It was the classic, are you in or out moment, designed to make Daniel feel like he was the one being unreasonable for hesitating, like he was letting everyone down by wanting to be careful with his own money. Carla jumped in immediately, her voice almost panicked. "Baby, Victor's right. This is the moment. You've done your research, you've asked your questions, you've seen the documents. You gotta have faith sometimes." This was the moment Daniel had been preparing for, and he delivered his response with an actor's precision. Hesitation, internal struggle, a deep breath, and then resolution breaking across his face like sunrise. "You're right. You're both right. I'm in. Let's do this." He watched Carla's face transform into pure joy and relief, watched Victor's eyes flash with triumph that he didn't quite manage to hide behind his professional smile, and felt absolutely nothing except cold satisfaction that they'd both just committed themselves on recording. "That's what I'm talking about," Carla practically shouted, drawing glances from nearby tables, hugging Daniel so tightly he felt the button camera press into his chest. "Baby, you won't regret this, I promise you." Victor was more controlled but equally pleased, shaking Daniel's hand firmly. "Welcome to Lux Crypto Ventures, partner. This is the beginning of something incredible." What they didn't know, what they couldn't have known, was that Daniel had no intention of wiring any money anywhere, that every word they'd spoken had been recorded, and that their celebration was actually the moment they'd sealed their own fate. They spent another 30 minutes hammering out final details. Daniel would come to Victor's office. Another red flag, Daniel noted, that in all this time Victor had never actually given him an address. On Tuesday morning at 9 a.m. to execute paperwork and arrange the wire transfer. Victor promised to have his attorneys present, his notary ready, everything professional and legitimate. Carla would be there too, she insisted, to support Daniel through this major moment. They even ordered a celebratory round of drinks, champagne that Carla picked out and Victor ordered. Though Daniel noticed his glass came out slightly smaller, and he barely sipped it, maintaining control while encouraging others to celebrate. Daniel accepted it all, played along, even took a selfie with Carla at her insistence. "We gotta document this moment, baby." While his mind was already 3 steps ahead, planning how he'd coordinate with Marcus to ensure the exposure was perfect, public, and undeniable. When they finally parted ways outside the restaurant, Carla hugged Daniel again and whispered in his ear, "I'm so proud of you for being brave, baby. This is going to change everything." Victor shook his hand once more with both hands in that politician grip that's supposed to convey sincerity, saying, "See you Tuesday morning, 9 sharp. Bring your ID and be ready to start your journey to real wealth." Daniel watched them walk away together toward Victor's BMW. Carla's arm linked through his, her body language showing both triumph and relief, and he wondered if she had any idea what she'd actually done, if somewhere underneath the greed and the infatuation and the rationalization there was a part of her that knew this was wrong. But then Victor opened the car door for her, and she looked up at him with an expression that was unmistakably romantic, and Daniel realized his aunt hadn't just chosen money over family. She'd chosen a con artist over reality, and whatever consequences came next, she'd earned them. Marcus appeared at Daniel's side once Victor's car pulled away, and they stood in silence for a moment processing what had just happened. "We got everything," Marcus said quietly, showing Daniel his laptop screen where the recording software had captured the entire conversation with perfect clarity. Every lie Victor told, every manipulation Carla attempted, every fraudulent promise and fake document described in incriminating detail. "This is enough to prosecute if we go to the police, or enough to destroy him publicly if we stick with the original plan. Your call." Daniel stared at the recording playback for a long moment, watching his own performance, seeing the exact moment where Victor's eyes had flashed with triumph, noticing details in Carla's expressions that he'd missed in the moment. The way her hands had trembled slightly when Daniel agreed to invest, how she'd looked at Victor for approval before speaking sometimes. The genuine emotion mixed with something that might have been guilt or might have been fear of losing out on her cut. "We stick with the plan," Daniel said finally, his voice hard in a way Marcus had never heard before. "We expose them publicly at the Apex on Monday night. That gives us tomorrow to contact the other victims and prepare everything. Gives us Monday to set up the presentation, and hits them the night before they're expecting me to wire the money. Maximum impact, public humiliation, and most importantly, we warn anyone else who might be in their crosshairs. Then we hand everything over to the police and let them deal with the criminal charges." Marcus nodded slowly, recognizing that this had become about more than just protecting Daniel's money. This was about justice, about preventing future victims, about punishing people who'd weaponized trust and family bonds for profit. "All right, then we've got work to do. Let's go back to your place and start building the presentation that's going to end Victor Kane's career and possibly destroy your aunt's relationship with your entire family. You sure you're ready for that second part?" Daniel thought about his mother, about the family dinners that would never be the same, about the way Carla would be ostracized once everyone knew what she'd tried to do, about whether exposing her publicly was justice or cruelty or some combination of both. But then he remembered the elderly widow who'd lost her husband's life insurance, the young athlete who'd almost destroyed his financial future, the salon owner who'd borrowed against her business. All the victims Victor had left in his wake with Carla, or people like Carla serving as his access points, his weapons, his accomplices whether willing or manipulated. "I'm ready," Daniel said. "And Marcus? Thank you. for believing me, for helping me, for being the kind of friend who shows up at 2 a.m. when shit gets real. Marcus clapped him on the shoulder. Always, bro. Now let's go destroy some people who really, really deserve it. That evening, Daniel and Marcus worked with the intensity of a tech startup in its final sprint before launch. They compiled every piece of evidence into a multimedia presentation that could be displayed on screens at the apex. Victor's criminal record with mugshot, the fake investment documents with highlighted inconsistencies, the reverse image searches showing stolen property photos, testimonial videos from Mrs. Thornton and Cameron Mitchell describing their experiences, the recording from today's lunch with key excerpts captioned and time-stamped, and finally a side-by-side comparison of every lie Victor had told versus the provable truth. The presentation was devastating, methodical, and impossible to dismiss as misunderstanding or coincidence. They titled it simply, The Real Victor Kane, a cautionary tale about trusting con artists. The hardest part was deciding how much to focus on Carla's involvement. Marcus argued for including everything, the metadata showing her communications with Victor starting immediately after Daniel shared his news, screenshots of her increasingly desperate texts pushing for the investment, analysis of her body language in the lunch recording showing her active participation in the manipulation. Daniel initially resisted, wanting to believe she deserved some protection, some mercy based on their history. But then Marcus pulled up the timeline again and showed Daniel something he'd missed. 3 weeks before Carla had even met Victor, she'd posted on Facebook asking if anyone knew legitimate investment advisors for a family member who'd come into money. She'd been actively looking for opportunities to monetize Daniel's success before Victor had even entered the picture, which suggested her betrayal wasn't Victor manipulating her. It was her seeking someone like Victor to help her exploit her nephew. That discovery changed everything. Daniel stopped arguing for mercy and instead helped Marcus build a comprehensive section on Carla's role. Not as a victim who'd been manipulated, but as an active participant who'd sought out ways to exploit her nephew's fortune and had found the perfect partner in Victor. The presentation would show the Facebook post, her communications pattern, her increasingly aggressive sales tactics, and most damningly, a financial analysis Marcus had run showing that Carla had debts totaling almost $85,000. Credit cards, her leased Mercedes, unpaid rent on her townhouse. That would be solved if she received even a small commission from Daniel's $1 million investment. She wasn't just greedy, she was desperate, and she'd seen her nephew's success as a solution to her own financial failures rather than something to celebrate genuinely. By midnight, they had transformed 2 weeks of investigation into a 20-minute presentation that would destroy Victor Kane and permanently alter Carla's relationship with her family. And Daniel felt absolutely no remorse. The truth was simple. They'd both made choices, they'd both weaponized his trust, and they'd both earned the consequences that were coming. Marcus saved the presentation to multiple locations. Encrypted cloud storage, USB drives, even emailed copies to both their accounts, ensuring it couldn't be lost or destroyed before Monday night. They'd already contacted the Apex and arranged for a special event Monday evening, telling the promoter they wanted to host a surprise investment celebration in the VIP section with multimedia presentation capabilities. The promoter, always eager for business that came with bottle service minimums, had readily agreed and even offered to promote it on the club's social media as a special announcement event. Victor would see the promotion and assume it was Daniel celebrating his investment decision publicly. The perfect bait to ensure he'd be there. Sunday was spent in careful coordination, contacting Mrs. Thornton and Cameron Mitchell to invite them to Monday's event without revealing exactly what was planned, just that they'd want to be there when Victor faced consequences for his actions. Both agreed immediately, Mrs. Thornton's voice breaking with emotion. "I've waited 3 years to see that man face justice. I'll be there." Daniel also made the difficult decision to call his mother and ask her to come to the Apex Monday night, telling her only that he had important news to share and he needed her support. "Baby, I don't do nightclubs," Denise Brooks protested, but something in Daniel's voice made her agree. "All right, if it's important to you, I'll be there." "Should I bring Carla?" The question landed like a punch. "No, Mama. Definitely don't tell Auntie. This is something she needs to hear at the same time as everyone else." The silence on the other end suggested his mother sensed something was wrong, but she didn't push, just agreed to be there at 8 p.m. Monday. Marcus spent Sunday afternoon working his contacts at the Atlanta Police Department. Not revealing the plan, but alerting a detective he knew in the fraud division that there might be something worth paying attention to Monday night at the Apex, and providing Victor's real name, Victor Alejandro Batista, along with his federal criminal record. "I'm not saying a crime is going to be confessed to," Marcus told Detective Lisa Warren carefully. "But I am saying that if you happen to be in the area around 8:30 p.m. with arrest warrants already prepared, you might witness some interesting revelations about an ongoing fraud scheme." Detective Warren, a 15-year veteran who'd worked dozens of investment fraud cases, understood immediately. "Text me the address. I'll be there with backup, plain clothes, ready to move if we hear anything that constitutes probable cause." It was the final piece falling into place. Not just public exposure, but actual legal consequences that would prevent Victor from simply moving to another city and continuing his predatory behavior. Monday arrived with the surreal quality of a day Daniel knew would permanently divide his life into before and after. He went through normal motions, showered, ate breakfast he couldn't taste, responded to Carla's excited text. "Tomorrow morning, baby. Can't wait to celebrate your investment." With a brief "see you tomorrow," while his mind ran through every possible scenario for how the evening could unfold. Best case, Victor and Carla would be caught completely off guard. The evidence would be undeniable, the police would make arrests, and justice would be served cleanly. Worst case, Victor would somehow escape before police could detain him, Carla would deny everything despite the evidence, and the public exposure would tear Daniel's family apart without actually achieving legal consequences. Most likely, somewhere messy in between, with public humiliation guaranteed, but criminal prosecution uncertain, and family relationships destroyed as collateral damage in pursuit of justice. At 6 p.m., Daniel and Marcus arrived at the Apex to set up, the club still relatively empty during early evening hours before the main crowd arrived. The promoter had reserved the main VIP section and set up exactly what they'd requested. Large screen display with HDMI connections, professional sound system, enough seating for about 30 people in the VIP area with clear sightlines to the presentation screen. Marcus ran through technical checks multiple times, ensuring the presentation would play perfectly, that backup systems were in place if anything failed, that the audio recordings would be clearly audible over club ambient noise. They'd arranged for the club's regular music to pause at 8:30 p.m. for the special announcement, which the DJ had been told was a surprise engagement celebration. Another lie in service of revealing truth. By 7 p.m., everything was ready, and all that remained was for the players to arrive and take their positions in what would be either justice or disaster, depending on how the next few hours unfolded. Mrs. Patricia Thornton arrived first at 7:45 p.m., and Daniel barely recognized her from her video call. She looked older in person, worn down by what Victor had done to her, dressed modestly but with quiet dignity, her eyes carrying the weight of someone who'd been betrayed and was still carrying that pain. "You must be Daniel," she said, shaking his hand with surprising firmness. "Thank you for including me in this. After what that man did to me, to my husband's memory, I need to see him face consequences, even if it's just public shame instead of prison time." Daniel introduced her to Marcus and explained briefly what would happen, and he saw something shift in her expression. Not just satisfaction, but relief that someone was finally fighting back against the person who'd devastated her life. Cameron Mitchell arrived minutes later, younger and more visibly angry than Mrs. Thornton, dressed in designer athletic. Where that marked him as someone who'd made it professionally, someone who should have been smarter than to almost fall for Victor's con. "Man, I can't believe he's still operating in Atlanta," Cameron said, his jaw tight. "My financial advisor literally had to physically restrain me from wiring money to this dude. If you're exposing him tonight, I want to help however I can." At 8 p.m., Daniel's mother arrived, and the look on her face when she saw the VIP setup and the gathering crowd made Daniel's stomach clench. She knew something was wrong, knew this wasn't a celebration, knew her son was about to reveal something that would hurt. Denise Brooks had raised Daniel alone after his father left, had worked double nursing shifts to keep him fed and housed, had sacrificed everything to give him opportunities. And now she stood in a nightclub she'd never normally enter, looking at her son with confusion and concern and unconditional love that made what was coming even harder. "Danny, baby, what's going on? Why are we here?" Daniel hugged her tightly, breathing in the familiar scent of her soap and coffee, and whispered, "Mama, I need you to trust me. Something's happened that you need to see, and I need you here when they come out. It's about Auntie Carla." He felt his mother stiffen in his arms, felt her immediate protective instinct activate, but she just nodded against his shoulder and said quietly, "Okay, baby. I'm here. Whatever you need." At 8:15 p.m., Victor and Carla arrived together, and Daniel watched them enter the club from his position in the VIP section with the detached focus of someone watching a trap spring closed. They were dressed for celebration. Victor in another expensive suit, this one charcoal gray with a burgundy tie that probably cost more than the average person's monthly rent. Carla in a form-fitting red dress that screamed success, and heels that added 4 inches to her height, both of them projecting the confidence of people who thought they'd won. They spotted the VIP section setup, and Daniel could see Carla pointed out to Victor. Both of them clearly assuming Daniel had arranged this as his own celebration of the investment decision. Both of them completely unprepared for what was actually about to happen. When Carla spotted Daniel's mother in the VIP area, confusion flickered across her face for just a moment before she painted on a bright smile and began making her way through the crowd toward them. Victor following close behind with his practiced charm already activating. "Denise, girl, what are you doing here?" Carla's voice was loud, surprised, her hug for her older sister genuine, even if everything else about her was currently fraudulent. "I didn't know Danny invited you to." She paused, looking around at the presentation setup, at Mrs. Thornton and Cameron Mitchell standing with Daniel, at the serious expressions that didn't match celebration. "To whatever this is." Victor extended his hand to shake Denise's, his charm offensive beginning immediately. "Mrs. Brooks, I'm Victor Kane, business associate of your son's. He's making some incredible investment decisions that are going to set him up for life." But Denise didn't take his hand, her nurse's instinct for reading people activating, her eyes going to Daniel with a question. "Who are these people, baby?" Daniel took a breath, looked at his mother, then at his aunt, then at Victor, and said simply, "Mama, Auntie, Mr. Kane, if you'll all take a seat, I have a presentation I need to share. It's about an investment opportunity that's been presented to me, and I want everyone to see what I've learned." The club music faded on cue at 8:28 p.m., and the DJ's voice came over the sound system. "All right, Atlanta, we've got a special announcement happening in the VIP section, so let's give them our attention." Suddenly, hundreds of clubgoers turned their attention upward to the VIP area. Phones already out because this generation documents everything, and Daniel felt the weight of all those eyes, all those recording devices, all that irreversible public attention focusing on what was about to happen. Carla was smiling nervously, still not understanding, whispering to Victor, "What's happening?" Victor's face had gone carefully neutral, his con artist instinct sensing danger, but not yet understanding its source or scope. Marcus dimmed the VIP section lights and the presentation screen illuminated, showing the title slide. "The Real Victor Kane, a cautionary tale about trusting con artists." Daniel watched Victor's face transform from confusion to recognition to pure panic in the space of 3 seconds, watched him stand up as if to leave, but by then Detective Warren and her partner had positioned themselves at the VIP section entrance, not yet making a move but clearly blocking the exit. "For the past 2 weeks," Daniel began, his voice amplified through the club's sound system for everyone to hear, "a man calling himself Victor Kane has been trying to convince me to invest $1 million into a business venture called Lux Crypto Ventures. He recruited my Aunt Carla to help him, using her relationship with me to build trust. What you're about to see is the truth about who Victor Kane really is, what his investment opportunity actually is, and how people like him destroy lives by weaponizing the trust of the people who love us." He clicked the remote, and Victor's mugshot filled the screen. Younger, harder, wearing an orange jumpsuit with a federal prisoner number across his chest. The crowd gasped audibly. Carla screamed, "What the fuck?" And Denise grabbed her sister's arm to keep her seated. Victor made a move toward the exit, but Detective Warren stepped forward, her badge now visible. "Mr. Batista, I'd advise you to stay put. We have some questions for you." And Daniel clicked to the next slide, beginning a presentation that would expose everything, destroy everyone involved, and ensure that Victor Alejandro Batista's con artist career ended tonight in the most public, most documented, most undeniable way possible. The VIP section erupted, Carla screaming, "Danny, what the hell are you doing?" Denise frozen in shock, Victor attempting to push past Detective Warren, only to be physically blocked by her partner. Mrs. Thornton crying quietly with what looked like relief, Cameron standing with his arms crossed watching justice finally unfold, and Marcus controlling the presentation from his laptop, while simultaneously recording everything on multiple devices to ensure this moment was preserved from every angle. The crowd below had gone completely silent, hundreds of phones pointed upward capturing every second. The moment already being live-streamed to thousands more on Instagram and TikTok, going viral in real time as Atlanta's club scene witnessed what would become legendary drama. Daniel's voice cut through the chaos, amplified and commanding. "Everyone please sit down. Annie, sit. You're going to want to hear this." Something in his tone, the absolute conviction, the lack of warmth, the transformation from nephew to prosecutor, made Carla sink back into her seat, though her eyes were wild with panic and rage. "Danny, baby, whatever you think is happening," she started, but Daniel clicked to the next slide, and her voice died as her Facebook post filled the screen, the one from 3 weeks before meeting Victor asking about investment advisors for a family member who'd come into money, dated and time-stamped proof that her betrayal had been premeditated. "This is you, Auntie, 3 weeks before you even met Victor, already trying to figure out how to monetize my success. Not how to help me invest wisely. How to find someone who could make you money off my money." The crowd below murmured, and Daniel could hear snippets of conversation. "That's cold." She set up her own nephew. "Family ain't shit these days." The presentation continued with methodical brutality. Each slide another piece of evidence, another lie exposed, another layer of the con revealed. Victor's criminal record appeared in full. 3 states, multiple fraud convictions, 38 months in federal prison for wire fraud and identity theft. His real name, Victor Alejandro Batista, appeared in bold red letters. "This man has been using a false identity to operate in Atlanta for 8 months, Daniel explained, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "The business he created, Lux Crypto Ventures, was registered 6 weeks ago using a fake address. The office he claims to have doesn't exist. The other investors he mentioned, Marcus Williams, Devin Jackson, Dr. Robert Chin, are either fictional characters, common names he's exploiting, or dead people whose identities he's stolen." Each revelation hit like a physical blow, and Daniel watched Victor's carefully constructed persona crumble. Watched him transform from confident businessman to cornered criminal looking desperately for an escape route that didn't exist. Then came the property photos, the ones Victor had used in his pitch, shown side by side with their actual sources. Real estate listings for buildings already sold, architectural firm portfolio images for projects in other cities, stock photography websites charging $29.99 for the images Victor had claimed were the properties Lux Crypto would acquire. "Every single property in Victor's presentation is fake," Daniel continued. "He stole images from real developments and claimed they were available for purchase. The Midtown address he provided doesn't exist. The numbers skip from 425 to 445 with number 435 in between. The property appraisal he promised to provide was created using a free template website and signed by a notary who, when my friend Marcus checked, had her notary license revoked 2 years ago for fraudulent activities." The audience below was completely engaged now, this real-life drama more compelling than any entertainment the club could provide, and Daniel could see phones still recording. See people texting their friends to come witness this. See the viral moment compounding in real time. "And the money," Daniel said, his voice hardening. "The wire transfer information Victor provided leads to a Delaware bank account registered to a shell company created 3 days ago specifically for this scam. If I'd wired my $1 million Tuesday morning, it would have been immediately transferred to offshore accounts and would have disappeared forever. I would have had no recourse, no legal recovery, nothing but an expensive lesson about trusting the wrong people." He clicked to the next slide showing the wire transfer instructions with investigative notes from Marcus's banking contacts highlighting every red flag. Newly created account, no transaction history, secondary account holders using aliases, flags in multiple fraud databases. Carla was crying now, her makeup running, and Daniel couldn't tell if it was genuine remorse or just panic at being caught, but he found he didn't care anymore which it was. Then Daniel played the audio. Excerpts from Saturday's lunch recording, Victor's voice filling the club as he described the fictional investors, promised impossible returns, created urgency through fake deadlines, every word now revealed as deliberate deception. The audience heard Victor lie with perfect confidence about Marcus Williams, the NFL player, about Devin Jackson, the tech executive, about the property deal that would close Friday, and they heard Carla's voice interjecting support, pushing Daniel to trust, to act quickly, to stop overthinking and just believe. That's my aunt's voice you're hearing, Daniel said unnecessarily, because everyone could see Carla sitting there being confronted with her own recorded betrayal. Actively working with Victor to pressure me, to manipulate me, to exploit the trust one had in her to steal my money. Not just allowing it to happen, participating in it, facilitating it, profiting from it. Denise finally spoke, her voice breaking. Carla, tell me this isn't true. Tell me you didn't. But Carla couldn't form words, could only cry, and her silence was confirmation. Daniel's mother turned to her son then, her eyes filled with pain that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with family breaking apart before her eyes. Danny, baby, why did you do this here? Why in front of all these people? Her question carried hurt and confusion, but not accusation, and Daniel felt his carefully. Maintained control cracked slightly. Because, Mama, if I'd confronted them privately, Victor would have disappeared and done this to someone else in another city. And Auntie would have denied everything or blamed Victor, or convinced you I was being paranoid. This way, there's no denying it, no escaping it, no pretending it didn't happen. Everyone sees the truth at the same time, including the police. As if on cue, Detective Warren stepped forward, her badge now prominently displayed. Victor Alejandro Batista, you're under arrest for fraud, identity theft, and parole violation. You have the right to remain silent. But Daniel wasn't finished. Before they take Victor away, I want everyone to hear from the other people he's victimized. He gestured to Mrs. Thornton, who stood with dignity despite her tears, and spoke into the microphone Daniel handed her. My name is Patricia Thornton. 3 years ago, Victor Batista, calling himself Vincent Kane at the time, convinced me to invest my late husband's life insurance money into a senior living facility that didn't exist. He took $300,000 from me, and I've been living in poverty ever since. I'm 73 years old, and I clean houses to survive because I trusted a man who preyed on my grief. Her voice broke, but she continued. If Daniel hadn't done this tonight, Victor would have moved to another city, changed his name again, and destroyed more lives. This young man saved people none of us will ever meet. He's a hero, even if it costs him his family. The crowd below applauded, actual applause in a nightclub for an elderly widow's testimony. And Victor, now in handcuffs, looked at Daniel with pure hatred, the charming mask completely destroyed to reveal the predator underneath. Cameron Mitchell spoke next, his anger more visible. I'm Cameron Mitchell. I play for the Hawks, and last year Victor almost got $200,000 from me with a fake sports memorabilia business scheme. Only reason he didn't is my financial advisor recognized the same scam from another client. But Victor's still out there operating, still finding new victims, because people are embarrassed to report being conned. Well, I'm not embarrassed, I'm pissed. And I'm grateful someone finally had the guts to expose this predator publicly. He looked directly at Carla then. And lady, I don't know your story. I don't know if he manipulated you too, but you helped him try to rob your own family. That's something you're going to have to live with. Carla sobbed harder, and Denise's expression showed she was processing the full scope of what her sister had done. Not just the betrayal of Daniel, but the pattern of victimization that she'd enabled. The final section of the presentation was the hardest. Daniel had to address his aunt directly, and he'd written this part at 3 a.m. when rage had given way to something more complicated, something that mixed grief with anger, betrayal with history, justice with loss. Aunt Carla, he began, and his voice was no longer the confident prosecutor's tone, but something rawer, more human. You were the first person I told about my success because I thought you'd be happy for me. I trusted you with information I didn't even tell my mother, because you'd always been there for me, always believed in me. And you took that trust and you weaponized it. You saw my success and you didn't think my nephew worked hard and deserves this. You thought, how can I profit from this? You met a con artist in a nightclub, and within 3 weeks you were trying to deliver me to him like I was a mark instead of your family. The presentation screen behind him showed the timeline. Her Facebook post, her first meeting with Victor, his revelation to her about his windfall, her escalating communications with Victor, the lunch meeting, all of it mapped out like a prosecution's exhibit. The thing that hurts most, Daniel continued, his voice cracking slightly, is that I still don't know if Victor manipulated you into this, or if you chose this. I don't know if you're a victim too, or if you were always this greedy, and I just never saw it. And honestly, I don't think it matters anymore. What matters is that when you had to choose between protecting me and profiting from me, you chose profit. When you had to choose between family and money, you chose money. And now everyone knows that about you. Carla finally found her voice. Danny, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I made a mistake. I thought it was real, Victor told me. But Daniel cut her off. No. You thought it was real because you wanted it to be real. Because if it was real, you'd get your commission, you'd pay off your debts, you'd finally have the life you've been performing for years. You made a choice to believe convenient lies instead of inconvenient truths. And you made that choice knowing it could destroy me. Denise stood then, positioning herself physically between her son and her sister, and addressed Carla with the quiet authority of the oldest sibling who'd always held their fractured family together. Carla, I don't know what happened to you. We grew up poor, we both worked hard to survive, and I thought we had the same values. But somewhere along the way you started wanting things more than you wanted integrity, and I watched you spiral into debt trying to look rich instead of being stable. I should have said something years ago, should have intervened, should have helped you before it came to this. But baby sister, what you tried to do to Daniel is unforgivable. He's your nephew, your blood, and you were willing to destroy him financially to solve your own problems. That's not a mistake, that's a choice. Carla reached for her sister's hands, but Denise stepped back. No, you don't get to touch me right now. You need to understand that you've broken something that can't be fixed with apologies or tears. You've lost my trust, you've lost Daniel's love, and you've lost your place in this family until you can look in a mirror and admit what you really did and why you really did it. The club's atmosphere had shifted from entertainment venue to something closer to a courtroom or a church confession. Hundreds of strangers bearing witness to a family's destruction, the weight of public judgment hanging in the air like smoke. Detective Warren and her partner were escorting Victor toward the exit, his handcuffs glinting under the club lights. But Victor couldn't resist one final attempt at manipulation, calling back to Carla. Baby, don't let them do this to us. Tell them the truth, that the business is legitimate, that we were trying to help him. Don't abandon me now. And in that moment, everyone in the club got to see exactly what Victor was. Even caught, even arrested, even facing prison, he was still trying to use Carla, still trying to manipulate her into becoming his alibi, his co-defendant, his final tool. Daniel watched his aunt's face as she processed this, saw the moment she finally understood that Victor had never loved her, had only used her, that their relationship had been as fake as everything else about him. Get him out of here, Detective Warren said firmly, and Victor was gone, removed from the club to face federal charges for parole violation, state charges for fraud and identity theft, and civil liability from multiple victims who would now have clear evidence to pursue restitution. But the harder question remained. What would happen to Carla? Detective Warren approached her carefully. Ms. Thomas, I'm going to need you to come to the station for questioning. Right now you're not under arrest, but you are a material witness and potential accomplice to fraud. You should probably call a lawyer. Carla looked at Denise with desperate hope. Dee, will you? But Denise shook her head. No, Carla. I'll make sure you have a lawyer's name, but I'm not going to that station with you. I'm going home with my son. You're going to have to face this on your own like the grown woman you are. It was the first time in their lives that Denise had refused to rescue her younger sister, and Carla seemed to crumble under the weight of that abandonment. As Detective Warren led Carla away, not in handcuffs but escorted, her red dress now seeming garish rather than celebratory, her tears making her makeup run in streaks that looked like war paint after battle, Daniel felt the adrenaline that had sustained him through the presentation begin to crash. His hands started shaking, his legs felt weak, and suddenly Marcus was there supporting him, guiding him to sit down while Denise rushed to get him water. You did good, bro, Marcus said quietly. You saved yourself, you exposed a predator, you prevented future victims. That matters more than anything else. But Daniel wasn't sure that was true. He looked around the VIP section at the aftermath of his scorched earth justice. Mrs. Thornton thanking him through tears, Cameron shaking his hand with respect, his mother looking 10 years older from the stress, and dozens of clubgoers below still recording, still posting, turning his family's destruction into content for their social media feeds. He'd won, but the victory felt hollow, tasted like ashes. The club DJ, reading the room perfectly, started the music again. Something gentle at first, giving people time to transition from witnesses to participants. And gradually the dance floor refilled as Atlanta nightlife reasserted itself, because life continues even after someone's world ends. Daniel, Marcus, and Denise left through a back exit to avoid the remaining crowd and the questions, and the people who wanted selfies with the guy who'd just pulled off the most dramatic con artist exposure the city had ever seen. In the car, driving through Atlanta's midnight streets, Denise finally spoke. "Baby, I need to understand something. Why didn't you come to me first? Why didn't you let me try to talk to Carla, see if she'd back out before you destroyed her publicly?" Daniel had known this question was coming and had prepared an answer. But sitting next to his mother in the dark car, honesty felt more important than justification. "Because, Mama, if I'd told you privately, you would have tried to protect her. You would have convinced me to give her another chance, to believe the best about her, to handle it quietly within the family. And Victor would have disappeared, and Carla would have denied everything. And in 6 months she'd be helping some other con artist target some other victim. But she's my sister," Denise said softly, and Daniel heard decades of complicated sibling history in those 4 words. All the times Denise had bailed Carla out of bad decisions, covered her debts, made excuses for her behavior, chosen family loyalty over personal boundaries. "She's your sister who tried to help a con artist steal $1 million from your son," Daniel replied gently. "And I know you love her, and I know you want to believe there's something redeemable in what she did. But Mama, the evidence doesn't lie. She sought out ways to exploit my money before she even met Victor. She fed him information about me. She pressured me repeatedly despite knowing I was uncomfortable. She chose to be part of this, and if we don't let her face real consequences, she'll do it again to someone else." Denise was crying now, silent tears running down her face as she drove, and Daniel realized his mother was grieving. Not just the sister she thought she had, but the family structure she'd worked her entire life to maintain despite poverty and abandonment and struggle. They drove to Denise's house in silence, and when they arrived, she made tea, her solution to every crisis, every heartbreak, every impossible situation. And the 3 of them sat in her small, comfortable kitchen that smelled like home and safety, processing what had happened. "What happens to Carla now?" Denise finally asked, and Marcus answered because he understood the legal system better than either of them. "Depends on what the DA decides to charge her with. Best case for her, they decide she was manipulated by Victor, and she's just a witness. More likely, they charge her with conspiracy to commit fraud, maybe accomplice charges. If they can prove she knew it was a scam and actively helped, which the evidence suggests, she could be looking at 2 to 5 years. She'll definitely face civil liability from you if you choose to sue for attempted fraud." Denise absorbed this information like a body blow. "My baby sister might go to prison." "Your baby sister tried to help steal $1 million, Daniel reminded her gently. "The courts will decide if that deserves prison, but Mama, she has to face consequences. Real ones. Not just family disappointment, and then we all move on." Over the next hour, as tea grew cold and exhaustion deepened, they talked through everything. The logistics of Daniel potentially testifying if charges were filed, whether they'd need to tell extended family, or if the viral videos would do that for them. They would. Already the hashtag Apex exposure was trending in Atlanta. How Daniel would protect his actual money now that he'd publicly revealed he had it. Whether he'd need to hire security or change his address or take precautions against. Revenge from Victor's potential associates. Marcus had already been thinking about this. The good news is Victor worked alone based on everything we found. The bad news is your face is now all over the internet associated with having $1 million. You need to move somewhere with better security. Maybe hire a financial advisor who can help you set up trusts and protections so your assets aren't as visible, and definitely need to scrub your social media of any location information. Daniel had saved his money but lost his privacy and his family's peace, and he was beginning to understand that every victory comes with hidden costs. Daniel's phone had been buzzing constantly. Texts from people he hadn't talked to in years, messages from reporters wanting interviews, DMs from strangers praising him or criticizing him or warning him about Victor's friends, and several from numbers he didn't recognize that just said things like, "You made a big mistake, and watch your back." He showed these to Marcus, who screenshot everything and forwarded them to Detective Warren with a note about potential threats. "This is the problem with public justice," Marcus said. "You got Victor arrested and exposed Carla, but you also painted a target on yourself for anyone who is in business with Victor or who just doesn't like snitches or who sees you as an easy mark now that they know you have money. We need to take this seriously." The reality of what Daniel had done, not just the family consequences but the practical dangers, was settling over him like a weight, and he wondered if there had been a smarter way to handle this that would have achieved justice without exposure, protection without destruction. As dawn started breaking over Atlanta, Marcus left to get some sleep, and Daniel sat with his mother in her living room. The same living room where he'd done homework as a kid, where she'd worked double nursing shifts to keep them afloat, where family had gathered for holidays and birthdays and celebrations back when family had meant something uncomplicated. "Mama, I'm sorry I brought this into your life," Daniel said quietly. "I'm sorry I destroyed your relationship with Auntie. I'm sorry everyone's going to be talking about our family. I'm sorry I couldn't find a quieter way to handle this." Denise was quiet for a long moment, looking at her son with eyes that had seen him grow from baby to man, that had witnessed every triumph and failure, that loved him with the ferocity only mothers possess. "Danny, you didn't destroy my relationship with Carla. She did that when she chose to betray you. And baby, what you did tonight was brave, and it was right, even though it was hard and it hurt people. You protected yourself, and you protected others. And that's what good people do even when it costs them something." But here's the truth Daniel couldn't say to his mother, couldn't even fully admit to himself as he sat in that living room watching sunrise paint the walls gold. He didn't feel victorious or righteous or even relieved. He felt empty, hollowed out, like he'd won the battle, but wasn't sure he could survive the war that would follow. Somewhere across Atlanta, Carla was sitting in an interrogation room facing questions that would determine whether she spent the next years in prison or just in poverty and shame. Victor was in a holding cell facing federal charges that would likely send him back to prison for years. Mrs. Thornton and Cameron had gotten some measure of justice, but their stolen money would never be recovered. And Daniel had protected his fortune but lost his aunt, traumatized his mother, become internet famous for family drama, and made himself a target for anyone who saw public exposure as betrayal worth avenging. As he finally closed his eyes to sleep in his childhood bedroom, surrounded by posters and memories from simpler times, Daniel realized that revenge and justice might achieve the same results, but leave very different scars. And he wasn't sure which one he'd actually chosen. 3 days after the exposure, Daniel's phone still wouldn't stop ringing. But now the calls weren't threats or congratulations. They were media outlets offering him money for exclusive interviews, lawyers representing potential clients wanting to sue Victor, and most disturbingly, law enforcement from 3 different states asking him to testify in cases against Victor Batista that had remained unsolved for years. Daniel had essentially become the prosecution's star witness in multiple fraud cases, his presentation and evidence collection having done what professional investigators hadn't managed to do: catch Victor red-handed with overwhelming documentation that made denial impossible. Detective Warren had told him the FBI was now involved because Victor's operation crossed state lines and used wire communications, elevating everything to federal crimes with serious prison time. "You did in 2 weeks what we couldn't do in 2 years, she'd admitted. "He's looking at 15 to 20 years minimum between the federal charges and parole violations. He's never conning anyone again." But Victor's fate was straightforward compared to Carla's legal situation, which existed in moral and legal gray areas that made everyone uncomfortable. The district attorney's office had spent 3 days interviewing her, reviewing Daniel's evidence, consulting with federal prosecutors, and trying to decide whether Carla was a con artist who deserved prison or a victim who deserved rehabilitation. The evidence was maddeningly contradictory. Her Facebook posts suggested premeditation, but her text messages showed genuine romantic feelings for Victor that could indicate manipulation. She'd actively pressured Daniel to invest, but she'd never actually received any money from Victor, which complicated conspiracy charges. She'd known something was wrong, the rushed timeline, the perfect-sounding returns, but she'd convinced herself it was legitimate because she'd wanted it to be. Finally, the DA had offered her a deal: plead guilty to conspiracy to commit fraud with a suspended sentence, 5 years probation, 500 hours community service, and mandatory financial literacy classes, plus permanent forfeiture of any claim to money from Victor or Daniel. The alternative was going to trial and risking 5 years in prison if convicted. Denise had begged Daniel to write a victim impact statement asking for leniency, to tell the DA that he didn't want his aunt prosecuted, that the family had suffered enough, that Carla had learned her lesson. But Daniel had refused, gently but firmly. "Mama, if I tell them not to prosecute, I'm saying what she did was okay, that betraying family for money doesn't deserve punishment. And that's not true. She needs to face consequences, real ones, or she'll do this again to someone else." The plea deal is already more lenient than what Victor's facing. She should take it and be grateful she's not going to prison. The conversation had created a new strain in their relationship. Denise understood her son's reasoning intellectually, but couldn't accept it emotionally. Couldn't reconcile the caring boy she'd raised with the man who refused to show mercy to family, even when asked directly. For the first time in Daniel's life, his mother looked at him with something that might have been disappointment, or might have been fear that she'd raised someone capable of such cold justice. Carla had taken the plea deal after her lawyer explained that going to trial would mean Daniel testifying against her, Mrs. Thornton and Cameron testifying about Victor's pattern, and the prosecution playing that audio recording for a jury that would hear her actively participating in fraud. The suspended sentence meant she wouldn't go to prison unless she violated probation, but the felony conviction meant she couldn't work in finance or any position of trust. Her credit was destroyed, and she'd lost her townhouse because she couldn't make rent without income. She was staying temporarily with a friend from church, working as a cashier at a grocery store, and according to Denise, was completely broken, unrecognizable as the sister I knew. Denise shared updates like this as if they were weapons, as if making Daniel understand the full extent of Carla's suffering would somehow make him feel guilty enough to. What? Daniel wasn't sure what his mother expected. He couldn't undo Carla's guilty plea, couldn't restore her reputation, couldn't make the consequences disappear just because they were harsh. The viral nature of the exposure had created its own complications. The hashtag Apex exposure had been viewed over 15 million times, spawning think pieces about family loyalty versus justice, about the ethics of public shaming, about whether Daniel was a hero or a cruel nephew who should have handled things privately. Daniel had become accidentally famous in Atlanta, recognized at grocery stores and gas stations by people who'd watched the videos and had strong opinions about what he'd done. Some people congratulated him, bought him coffee, thanked him for exposing predators. Others called him a snitch, said he'd betrayed his own blood, told him that airing family business publicly was worse than what Carla had attempted. He'd had to delete his social media accounts after receiving hundreds of messages daily debating whether he was justified or just vindictive. And even then, people created fake accounts in his name, posted supposed updates on his life, turned his story into entertainment content without his permission or control. Marcus had warned him this would happen, had suggested they could have exposed Victor without making it quite so theatrical. But Daniel had insisted on the public venue specifically to prevent denial and create undeniable documentation. Now he was living with the consequences of that choice, not just the social media circus, but real impacts on his life. He'd had to move from his apartment after his address was posted online. He'd hired a lawyer to send cease and desist letters to people using his name and image without permission. He'd lost freelance clients who didn't want to be associated with someone so publicly controversial. And most painfully, he'd received a letter from extended family, cousins, aunts, uncles, formally disinviting him from the family reunion scheduled for next summer because his divisive actions and willingness to destroy family in public made him unwelcome at family gatherings. They'd chosen Carla's side despite her guilt, chosen family loyalty over truth, and Daniel realized he'd underestimated how many people would prefer comfortable lies to uncomfortable justice. The only bright spot in the aftermath was the financial security Daniel had actually achieved. With Marcus's help, he'd set up proper asset protection through trusts and investment accounts that couldn't be easily accessed or identified publicly. He'd paid off his mother's mortgage despite her protests, established a college fund for his young cousins who weren't involved in the drama, and yes, he'd helped Mrs. Thornton with some of her debt because her losses had been real and devastating while his losses had been prevented. The money itself wasn't bringing him happiness exactly, but it was providing security and options, the ability to help people who deserved help and to protect himself from people who didn't deserve access. He'd also hired a proper financial advisor, a legitimate one this time, thoroughly vetted through multiple sources, who'd shown him how $1.2 million properly invested could generate passive income that would let him work on projects he cared about rather than just whatever paid the bills. But money couldn't solve the fundamental problem Daniel was facing. He'd done the right thing for all the right reasons, and he was being punished for it by the people he'd expected to support him. His mother barely called anymore, their conversations stilted and uncomfortable when they did talk. His extended family had chosen sides against him. His social media had become a battleground of strangers debating his character. And somewhere in the back of his mind, a voice that sounded disturbingly like his father's, the man who'd abandoned them, whispered that maybe loving people wasn't worth the inevitable betrayal, that maybe protecting yourself meant staying isolated, that maybe Daniel had learned the wrong lesson from all of this. Marcus noticed his friend spiraling and intervened one evening with direct honesty. "Bro, you're not wrong for what you did, but you're going to drown if you keep swimming in this toxic pool. You need therapy, you need to process the trauma of family betrayal, and you need to decide if you're going to let Carla's choices and other people's judgments destroy you from the inside out." Daniel started therapy the following week, sitting in a comfortable office across from Dr. Angela Morrison, a Black woman in her 50s who specialized in trauma and family systems, and who didn't flinch when he told her the whole story. "So you're struggling with guilt about doing something you believe was right?" she asked after he'd finished. "Yes. No. I don't know," Daniel admitted. "I don't feel guilty about exposing them, they deserved it. But I feel guilty about not feeling guilty, if that makes sense. Like, shouldn't I feel worse about the fact that my aunt is working at a grocery store and my family hates me? Shouldn't that hurt more than it does? What kind of person does it make me that I can watch someone's life fall apart and just feel nothing?" Dr. Morrison leaned forward. "It makes you someone protecting themselves from further trauma. You're disassociating from empathy, because feeling it would be unbearable. But Daniel, that numbness isn't strength, it's a defense mechanism, and it's not sustainable. Eventually you're going to have to feel all of this, the betrayal, the loss, the grief, the anger, all of it." Over the next several sessions, Dr. Morrison helped Daniel understand that he was grieving. Not the loss of someone who died, but the loss of who he'd thought Carla was, the loss of the family structure he'd believed in, the loss of innocence about how people he loved could treat him. "You're mourning the aunt who helped you when you were broke," she explained. "That person was real to you, and finding out she was also capable of betrayal doesn't erase your positive memories, but it does fundamentally change the story you told yourself about who she was. That's a profound loss, and you're allowed to grieve it even while maintaining boundaries against the person she actually is." Daniel found himself crying in that office for the first time since the exposure, finally releasing emotions he'd kept locked down because showing vulnerability had felt like admitting weakness, like giving Carla power she didn't deserve. But Dr. Morrison helped him understand that grief wasn't weakness. It was proof that he'd loved genuinely and been hurt genuinely, and that capacity for genuine feeling was actually his strength, not his flaw. The breakthrough came in their 5th session when Dr. Morrison asked a question Daniel hadn't expected. "Who are you performing strength for?" Because everything about your response to this situation, the perfect presentation, the public exposure, the refusal to show mercy, the emotional shutdown, it all reads like someone performing in vulnerability because they're terrified of being seen as weak. So who taught you that vulnerability was weakness? Daniel sat with that question for a long moment before answering. "My father. When he left us after his lottery win, he told my mother that she and I were dead weight, that we were holding him back from the life he deserved. I was 7, and I heard him say it. And I promised myself I'd never be weak like my mother, never let anyone take advantage of me like he took advantage of her, never trust anyone enough to give them that power. So, when Carla tried to scam me, it wasn't just about the money. It was about proving that I wasn't going to be the weak one who gets betrayed. I was going to be the strong one who fights back." "And did exposing Carla make you feel strong?" Dr. Morrison asked gently. Daniel considered lying, considered saying yes, but therapy only worked with honesty. "No, it made me feel alone. It made me feel like I proved my father right, that being vulnerable with people just gives them weapons to hurt you. So the smart thing is to never trust anyone completely. But that's a really lonely way to live, and I don't want to become my father. I don't want to be someone who sees every relationship as transactional, every act of trust as weakness. But I also don't know how to trust people after this." Dr. Morrison nodded slowly. "That's the real work, Daniel. Not deciding whether you were right to expose Carla. You were right, and we're not going to debate that. The real work is learning that Carla's betrayal was about her character, not your judgment. Learning that your mother's disappointment comes from her own trauma around family and doesn't mean you failed her. Learning that extended family choosing Carla's side says more about them than about you. And most importantly, learning that Marcus helped you, that Mrs. Thornton thanked you, that you yourself took action to protect others. All of that proves that trust isn't always betrayed, that vulnerability isn't always exploited, that good people exist even though bad people also exist." Meanwhile, Carla's situation had stabilized into a new, diminished reality. She was living in a studio apartment above a laundromat, working 40 hours a week at the grocery store, attending court-mandated financial literacy classes, where she learned basic budgeting from a community college instructor who had no idea she was the infamous aunt from #Apex Exposure. According to Denise, who maintained contact despite Daniel's boundaries, Carla had stopped wearing makeup, had gained weight from depression and stress eating, and spent most of her free time watching TV and crying. She'd asked Denise repeatedly if Daniel would ever forgive her, if there was any path back to having a relationship with him, and Denise had honestly told her, "I don't know, baby. He's seeing a therapist, he's processing a lot, but right now he doesn't want contact with you, and I have to respect that even though it breaks my heart." Carla had apparently written Daniel a letter. Not an apology exactly, but an attempt at explanation, that Denise was holding, waiting for the right moment to give it to him, a moment Daniel wasn't sure would ever come. 3 months after the exposure, Daniel received unexpected news. Victor Batista had pleaded guilty to all federal charges in exchange for a 22-year sentence in federal prison, and as part of his plea agreement, he'd provided information on a larger fraud network operating across the Southeast. His testimony had led to the arrest of 7 other people who provided fake documents, shell companies, and money laundering services for various con artists. Victor's cooperation wouldn't reduce his sentence significantly. He was 52 now and would be 74 when eligible for parole. But it meant that Daniel's decision to expose him publicly had triggered a cascade that would prevent potentially thousands of future victims. Detective Warren called personally to thank him. "Your investigation and evidence collection solved cases in 4 states. You've quite literally saved people who will never know your name from being victimized. That matters, even if it doesn't feel like it right now." The validation from law enforcement helped, but it didn't resolve the family situation that continued to fester like an untreated wound. Denise had finally given Daniel the letter from Carla during one of their increasingly rare dinners together, sliding the envelope across the table with a pleading look that said everything she couldn't put into words. Daniel had taken it home but hadn't opened it for 3 days, the envelope sitting on his coffee table like Schrodinger's apology, both genuine and manipulative until he actually read it and collapsed the possibility into reality. When he finally opened it at 2 a.m. on a restless night, the contents were somehow both exactly what he expected and completely surprising. Carla's handwriting, usually so careful and decorative, was messy, rushed, authentic in its imperfection. The letter wasn't structured or polished, just raw thoughts spilled onto paper in what looked like multiple sessions, different pen colors suggesting she'd returned to it over days or weeks. "Danny," the letter began, "I don't know if you'll ever read this, but I need to write it even if you throw it away. I've been in these financial classes learning about budgeting and debt and how to manage money, and all I can think about is how I had it backwards my whole life. I thought money would make me happy, would make me matter, would make people respect me. I built my whole life around looking successful instead of being successful, and when you told me about your windfall, my first thought wasn't pride, it was jealousy. I was jealous that you'd achieved what I'd been performing for years, and I hated myself for it. When I met Victor, he made me feel special, made me feel like I could finally be part of something big. I wanted to believe him so badly that I ignored every red flag, convinced myself that this was my chance to finally stop pretending. I told myself I was helping you, that connecting you with an investment opportunity made me a good aunt, but that was a lie. I was helping myself, using you, and I knew it even while I was doing it. That's the part one can't forgive myself for. Not that I was stupid enough to fall for Victor's con, but that I was selfish enough to try to involve you in it, even when my gut was telling me something was wrong." The letter continued for 3 pages, and Daniel read it multiple times, looking for manipulation, for excuses, for the kind of non-apology apology that took responsibility while actually shifting blame. But surprisingly, genuinely, Carla seemed to be owning her choices. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even know if I deserve forgiveness. What I did was inexcusable, and exposing me the way you did was probably the only thing that could have actually made me face reality instead of making excuses. I was humiliated, I lost everything, and I was angry at you for months. But now, working at that grocery store, living in that tiny apartment, going to those classes where they teach basic money skills I should have learned decades ago, I'm starting to understand that you saved me. Not in a way I wanted to be saved, not in a comfortable way, but you stopped me from becoming someone even worse than I already was. If you'd given me that money, if the scam had worked, I would have spent it on more fake luxury, more performance, and eventually I would have needed more, and I would have found another victor to help me get it. You broke that cycle by making the consequences real and immediate and public enough that I couldn't run from them or rationalize them away. The letter ended with something that might have been hope or might have been resignation. I don't know if we'll ever have a relationship again. Maybe we shouldn't. Maybe I'm too broken, too damaged by my own choices to be trusted around you. But Danny, I want you to know that I see you now in a way I didn't before. I see how strong you had to be to expose me, how much it must have cost you emotionally to choose justice over family comfort, and how much courage it takes to live with principles even when they make you unpopular. You're twice the person I ever was, and maybe that's why I tried to bring you down to my level, because your success made my failures more obvious. I'm working on being better. I'm in therapy now, court-mandated, but I'm actually going. I'm learning who I am without the performance, and I'm trying to figure out how to build a real life instead of an Instagram life. If you never want to talk to me again, I understand. But if someday, years from now, you decide to give me a chance to show you I've changed, I'll be ready. I love you, even though I showed you the opposite of love. I'm sorry, even though sorry isn't enough. And I'm grateful you stopped me, even though I hated you for it. Love, Auntie Carla. Daniel sat with the letter until sunrise, reading it multiple times, sharing it with Dr. Morrison in his next therapy session, even letting Marcus read it to get his perspective. Marcus was cautious. It sounds genuine, but con artists are good at sounding genuine. She might actually be sorry, or she might be sorry she got caught. Time will tell. Dr. Morrison was more optimistic. This reads like someone actually doing the work of change rather than just performing remorse. The question isn't whether she's genuine. The question is whether you want a relationship with her again, even if she is genuine. Because Daniel, you get to choose. Her growth doesn't obligate you to forgive her. Her apology doesn't require your acceptance. You can acknowledge that she's changing while still maintaining boundaries to protect yourself. And Daniel realized that was what he'd been struggling with. The belief that if Carla was genuinely sorry and genuinely changing, he was somehow obligated to welcome her back, to restore the relationship, to prove he wasn't vindictive by showing mercy. What if I never forgive her? Daniel asked Dr. Morrison. What if 5 years from now she's completely changed, she's rebuilt her life, she's proven herself trustworthy, and I still don't want a relationship with her because the betrayal cut too deep? Does that make me the villain of this story? Dr. Morrison shook her head. Daniel, there is no story. That's what you need to understand. You're not a character performing a role for an audience. You're a human being setting boundaries to protect your well-being. If you never want a relationship with Carla again, that's not vindictive. That's just honest acknowledgement that some betrayals cause irreparable damage. And if someday you do want to try rebuilding a relationship with her, that's also valid. Both choices are okay. You get to decide, and you get to change your mind, and you don't owe anyone, not your mother, not your extended family, not the internet, an explanation or justification for what feels right to you. That session marked a turning point for Daniel. Not forgiveness exactly, but release. He stopped obsessing over whether he'd done the right thing and started focusing on building the life he actually wanted rather than defending the choices he'd already made. He started saying yes to things he'd been avoiding. Marcus's invitations to social events, volunteer opportunities with a tech nonprofit that taught coding to underprivileged kids, even a date with someone Marcus had introduced him to who knew nothing about #Apex exposure and thought Daniel was just a quiet, smart guy who was good with computers. He didn't tell his mother about the date or the volunteering or the therapy breakthroughs because he'd realized that Denise was still processing her own grief about her sister and couldn't be his emotional support right now. That hurt, but it was also freeing, releasing his mother from the obligation to choose sides, allowing her to maintain whatever relationship with Carla she needed while he maintained whatever distance he needed. 4 months after the exposure, Daniel received a text from an unknown number. This is Patricia Thornton. I don't want to intrude on your life, but I wanted you to know that the restitution check you helped me get means I can stop cleaning houses. At 73, I finally have some dignity back. Thank you for what you did, even though I know it cost you your family. Some people are worth saving, even when they're strangers. You're a good man. Daniel read that text multiple times, screenshot it, saved it to a folder he'd titled Why It Mattered, where he also kept Cameron's thank you email, Detective Warren's commendation letter, and articles about the 7 additional arrests that had resulted from his investigation. On hard days, when he doubted whether the cost had been worth it, when he missed the family he used to have before money and betrayal had destroyed it, he read those messages and reminded himself that justice wasn't just about punishing wrongdoing. It was about protecting people who couldn't protect themselves, about preventing future harm, about choosing principles over comfort, even when comfort would have been so much easier. And here's the truth that took Daniel 4 months of therapy, countless sleepless nights, and one elderly widow's gratitude to finally understand. Doing the right thing doesn't guarantee a happy ending, doesn't promise that family will rally behind you, doesn't ensure that your sacrifice will be recognized or appreciated by the people whose opinions you value most. Sometimes doing the right thing means losing everything that feels comfortable to gain something harder to quantify: self-respect, integrity, the knowledge that you didn't choose the easy lie over the difficult truth. Daniel had exposed Victor and Carla, had saved future victims, had triggered arrests that would prevent thousands of people from being scammed. And in doing so, he'd lost his aunt, strained his relationship with his mother, been rejected by extended family, and become internet infamous in ways he'd never wanted. Both things were true simultaneously. He'd done something important, and he'd paid an enormous price for it, and he'd have to live with both those truths forever because they couldn't be separated into neat categories of victory or defeat. Daniel Brooks, now 31, sat in a coffee shop in Charlotte, North Carolina, a city he'd moved to 18 months ago specifically because nobody there knew about #Apex exposure. Nobody recognized him from viral videos. Nobody had opinions about whether he'd been a hero or a villain for exposing his aunt. He'd built a new life here, a small but successful consulting business helping startups with app development, a modest 2-bedroom apartment he actually owned rather than rented, a small circle of friends who knew him as the quiet guy who was good with code and terrible at karaoke, and absolutely no social media presence beyond a professional LinkedIn that had no personal information whatsoever. The last 2 years had been about radical privacy, about rebuilding identity outside of that one dramatic night, about answering the question of who Daniel Brooks was when he wasn't defined by betrayal and exposure and viral fame. His relationship with his mother had slowly healed through weekly phone calls where they'd carefully avoided mentioning Carla for months until Denise finally admitted, "Baby, I understand now why you did what you did. It took me too long, and I'm sorry for that. I was so focused on keeping our family together that I forgot sometimes family breaks because one person betrayed the foundation, not because another person exposed the betrayal." That conversation, 10 months after the exposure, had been the beginning of their real reconciliation. Not forgetting what happened, but accepting it, processing it together instead of on opposite sides of a divide. Denise had visited Charlotte twice, met Daniel's new friends, approved of his healthier lifestyle and his therapist and his commitment to building something sustainable rather than spectacular. She'd stopped giving him updates about Carla without being asked, stopped trying to facilitate reconnection, stopped mediating between her son and her sister because she'd finally accepted they were both adults who could make their own choices about relationship. Marcus had stayed Daniel's closest friend through everything, visiting Charlotte quarterly and maintaining daily text conversations that ranged from tech news to therapy breakthroughs to completely meaningless memes. Last year, Marcus had gotten engaged to a woman named Jasmine who worked in cybersecurity with him, and he'd asked Daniel to be his best man. A role Daniel had accepted with genuine happiness rather than the performance of happiness, because Marcus's loyalty during the darkest period had proven that not everyone betrays trust, that some people show up consistently even when it's inconvenient or uncomfortable. The bachelor party had been low-key and perfect, the kind of celebration that honored friendship without drama, and standing next to Marcus at his wedding 3 months ago, Daniel had felt something shift inside himself. A loosening of the defensive walls he'd built. A recognition that maybe protecting yourself didn't have to mean isolating yourself. That boundaries and connection could coexist if you chose people carefully and communicated clearly. Daniel had dated sporadically over the past 2 years. Nothing serious, mostly because he'd been too focused on healing to invest fully in anyone new, but also because Dr. Morrison had worked with him on recognizing the difference between healthy caution and self-protective isolation. The woman he was currently seeing, Lauren, was a librarian who thought coding was boring but appreciated Daniel's quiet intelligence and dry humor. She knew the broad strokes of what had happened with Carla, but not the details. And Daniel appreciated that she'd never once Googled him or tried to find the viral videos. respecting his need to be known for who he was now rather than what had happened to him then. They were taking things slow, building foundation instead of rushing toward labels or commitment, and it felt sustainable in a way Daniel's life hadn't felt in years. Not perfect, not passionate in a movie romance way, but solid, honest, real. Victor Batista was currently serving year 2 of his 22-year sentence at a federal facility in Pennsylvania, and according to occasional updates from Detective Warren, he'd become a model prisoner who taught financial literacy classes to other inmates in what was either genuine reformation or another long con. Daniel didn't care which. Victor was contained, neutralized, prevented from hurting anyone for at least 2 decades, and that was sufficient. The 7 additional arrests that had resulted from Victor's cooperation had led to convictions in 6 cases, disrupting a fraud network that had been operating for nearly 15 years. Mrs. Thornton had written Daniel one more time on the anniversary of the exposure, telling him she'd started volunteering at a senior center teaching other elderly people how to recognize scams, turning her victimization into advocacy. Cameron Mitchell had credited Daniel publicly in an interview about financial literacy for athletes, saying a civilian did better detective work than most professionals and saved me and a lot of other people from being scammed. We should all be that vigilant. The impact rippled outward in ways Daniel would never fully know, lives saved that would never send him thank you notes, people protected by his choice to expose rather than handle quietly. As for Carla, Daniel had maintained zero direct contact for 2 full years, though he received occasional updates through Denise that he neither requested nor rejected. Carla had completed her probation successfully, was still working, now assistant manager at the grocery store, had been attending therapy and debtors' anonymous meetings, and according to Denise, had become almost unrecognizable as the flashy woman she'd been. She's quiet now, Denise had said during her last visit. Humble, almost to the point of being invisible. She talks about you sometimes, not asking to reach out, but just processing her guilt, wondering if you're happy, hoping you've been able to move on. She's dating someone, a teacher, very normal, very stable. And she told me last week that she's grateful you exposed her, because otherwise she would have destroyed that relationship too with her lies and performance. I don't know if that matters to you, but I thought you should know she's not asking for anything, just living differently. Daniel had listened without response, because what could he say? That he was glad she'd changed? That her growth absolved the betrayal? Neither was true, but neither was he still actively angry. He'd moved beyond anger into something more like indifference, which wasn't forgiveness but wasn't hatred either. On the 2-year anniversary of the exposure, Daniel received an unexpected package at his Charlotte apartment, forwarded through his mother because Carla didn't have his address and had respected his boundary of no direct contact. Inside was a handwritten card, a cashier's check for $10,000 and a letter. The card was simple. Danny, this is the first $10,000 of the money I cost you in emotional damage lost. Opportunities, and the price of starting over in a new city. I've been saving it for 18 months. It's not enough and it never will be, but it's real money earned from real work, not performance or schemes. I don't expect this to fix anything. I just need you to know I'm taking responsibility in the only way I can. The letter explains more, but only if you want to read it. If you don't, that's okay too. See. Daniel stared at the check for a long time. $10,000 represented months of savings on an assistant manager's salary, represented genuine sacrifice rather than empty words, represented Carla doing something concrete rather than just feeling sorry. Daniel called Dr. Morrison. He'd transitioned to monthly check-ins rather than weekly therapy and discussed the package. What does it make you feel? She asked. Confused, Daniel admitted. Because part of me wants to reject it, send it back, prove that I don't need anything from her. But part of me recognizes that she's doing something hard, something real, and rejecting it might be more about my ego than about actual boundaries. And part of me, a part I'm not proud of, wants to keep the money but still not forgive her, wants to take the restitution but refuse the relationship. Dr. Morrison was quiet for a moment. Daniel, all of those reactions are valid. You get to feel all of them simultaneously. The question is, what serves your well-being? Does accepting the money create an obligation you don't want? Does refusing it deny Carla the chance to make genuine amends? Or does it matter less than you think? And the real question is whether you're ready to read that letter or whether you need more time. Daniel decided to read the letter, but not immediately. He let it sit for a week, then 2 weeks, carrying it in his bag unopened while he made the decision about whether he wanted to engage. Finally, on a quiet Sunday morning when Lauren was out of town and Marcus was busy with his new marriage and Daniel had the space to process alone, he opened it. The letter was shorter than the first one, more focused, less rambling. Danny, I'm not going to ask you to forgive me because I've learned in therapy that forgiveness isn't something you owe me. It's something you give yourself if and when you're ready, and it has nothing to do with whether I deserve it. I'm writing to tell you what I've learned about myself in the past 2 years. Not to convince you of anything, but because you deserve to know that your decision to expose me had the impact you intended. It forced me to change. When you exposed me publicly, I lost everything. My reputation, my lifestyle, my fake friends, my self-image as someone who was cleverer than everyone else. I was humiliated and angry and convinced you'd ruined my life. It took me 6 months of therapy to understand that I'd ruined my own life years earlier, and you'd just made the ruins visible. The letter continued with specific examples of change. Therapy insights about how she'd built identity around performance rather than substance. Debtors Anonymous teaching her that spending money she didn't have was a symptom of deeper problems with self-worth and authenticity. Relationships with normal people who didn't care about luxury brands or Instagram aesthetics teaching her what genuine connection felt like. I'm dating a man named Thomas who's a high school history teacher, she wrote. He makes $52,000 a year, drives a 10-year-old Honda, and is the most genuinely happy person I've ever met because he's built a life based on what actually matters, helping kids learn, having real friends, living within his means, being honest about who he is. Being with him has shown me how exhausting it was to constantly perform wealth and success I didn't have. The $10,000 I sent you represents 10 months of saving $1,000 per month from my paycheck. It hurt to save it. There were things I wanted to buy, experiences I wanted to have. But it also felt good in a way spending money never did, because I was finally doing something real to make amends rather than just feeling sorry about what I did. The letter's final paragraph was the most challenging. I know I can't undo what I did or erase the damage I caused. I know that even if I save for the next 10 years and send you $10,000 every year, it won't compensate for the emotional harm, the family relationships I damaged, the safety you lost when you became internet famous. But I'm going to keep saving and keep sending you money annually on the anniversary of the exposure. Not because I think it will make us family again, but because taking concrete action to make amends is part of being accountable, and I need to be accountable for what I did. You don't have to respond to these letters or checks. You don't have to acknowledge them or thank me or update me on your life. Your silence is enough. It means you're living your life free from me, which is exactly what you deserve. But Danny, if you ever want to talk, even once, even just to yell at me or tell me everything I cost you, my number is at the bottom of this letter. Not because I expect you to call, but because you should have the option if you ever want it. I love you, I'm sorry, and I'm grateful you stopped me from becoming worse than I already was. Your aunt who's trying to earn back the right to call herself that, Carla. Daniel sat with the letter for hours, reading it multiple times, analyzing it for manipulation tactics the way he used to debug code looking for security vulnerabilities. But unlike the first letter, which had been raw and emotional, this one was structured and thoughtful in a way that suggested Carla had worked on it with her therapist, had considered every word's impact, had prioritized his well-being over her own desire for absolution. The offer to be yelled at, to receive his anger without defense, felt particularly genuine. A recognition that amends weren't about making herself feel better, but about giving him space to express whatever he needed to express. But Daniel realized he didn't want to yell at her. He didn't want to maintain the anger, didn't want to keep her frozen as the villain of his story, didn't want to tie his identity to being the person she'd betrayed. He wanted to be someone who'd survived betrayal and built something better, someone who could acknowledge her change without being obligated to participate in it, someone who could accept that multiple truths coexisted. She genuinely changed, and he was still entitled to boundaries. She was taking real accountability, and he didn't owe her forgiveness. She loved him, and he didn't have to return that love just because it might finally be genuine. That evening, Daniel made 2 decisions. First, he deposited the check, not because he needed the money, but because Carla needed to make restitution, and accepting it allowed her that accountability without requiring he give her anything emotional in return. Second, he wrote a brief email to the address she'd provided. Carla, I received your letter and the check. Thank you for the accountability and for respecting my boundaries. I'm glad you're building a healthier life, and I hope you continue therapy and continue making choices based on who you want to be rather than who you want others to think you are. I'm not ready for direct communication or relationship, and I don't know if I ever will be. But I want you to know that I'm not carrying anger toward you anymore. I've moved beyond it into my own life, my own healing, my own future. That's not forgiveness exactly, but it's release. Take care of yourself. Daniel. He read it 3 times before sending, making sure it was honest without being cruel, boundaried without being rejecting, final without being vindictive. It said what was true, that he'd let go of needing her to suffer, but hadn't yet reached a place where he wanted her back in his life, and might never reach that place, and that was okay. Carla's response came 3 days later, just 2 sentences. Thank you for reading it and for your honesty. That's more than I deserved, and I'm grateful. See. No pleading for more, no pushing for relationship, no manipulation disguised as gratitude. Just simple acknowledgement that Daniel had given her what he was willing to give, and she was accepting that boundary without protest. That restraint, that respect for his limits, told Daniel more about her genuine change than any amount of lengthy explanation could have. She'd learned that love wasn't about what you wanted from someone, but what you were willing to give them, including the gift of space and acceptance of their boundaries, even when it meant permanent distance. 6 months later, Daniel was sitting in that same Charlotte coffee shop when his phone buzzed with a call from a number he didn't recognize. He almost didn't answer. Telemarketer was most likely, but something made him pick up. Daniel Brooks? An unfamiliar woman's voice asked. Yes. This is Sarah Mitchell. I'm an investigative journalist with the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. I'm working on a follow-up piece about Victor Batista's fraud network and the civilian investigation that broke the case open. I'd love to interview you about what happened 2.5 years ago. Get your perspective on, Daniel interrupted gently. I appreciate the call, but I'm not interested in being interviewed. That chapter of my life is closed, and I'm not looking to reopen it publicly. There was a pause, then Sarah continued. I understand, and I respect that. But Mr. Brooks, what you did has become a case study in how civilians can use technology and documentation to expose fraud when law enforcement lacks resources. I've interviewed Detective Warren, Mrs. Thornton, Cameron Mitchell, even Victor's parole officer. Your investigation prevented an estimated $4 million in fraud that was in Victor's pipeline based on communications we found. Don't you think that story deserves to be told properly, by you rather than by people who only saw parts of it? Daniel was quiet for a moment, processing the number. $4 million in prevented fraud, dozens or hundreds of people who would have been victimized if he hadn't acted. Then he thought about Mrs. Thornton teaching seniors to recognize scams, about Cameron advocating for financial literacy, about the 7 additional arrests that had dismantled a network. Ms. Mitchell, if I were to participate, and I'm not saying I will, what exactly would you want to focus on? Sarah's voice became more animated. Not the family drama, not the viral video circus, not the personal stuff. I want to focus on the investigative methodology, how you researched, how you documented, how you built an airtight case using publicly available tools that anyone could access. I want to turn your experience into a resource that helps other people recognize and expose fraud before they lose money. And honestly, I want to counter the narrative that you were just an angry nephew seeking revenge. The evidence shows you were methodical, careful, and primarily motivated by preventing harm to others. That's a story worth telling. Would my aunt be mentioned? Daniel asked. Only in the context of how Victor typically operated, using trusted connections to access marks. I wouldn't name her or sensationalize her involvement. This isn't about shaming anyone who made mistakes. It's about exposing the tactics predators use and giving people tools to protect themselves. Daniel made a decision that surprised himself. Okay, but I have conditions. 1. You send me any quotes you plan to attribute to me for approval before publication. 2. No photos, no video, just my words. 3. You donate your journalist fee to Mrs. Thornton's fraud prevention program. And 4. You make it clear that I'm not interested in further interviews or media attention. This is my final word on the subject. Sarah agreed immediately, and they scheduled a call for the following week, where Daniel would walk her through his investigation methodology in detail that could help future victims recognize red flags and document evidence properly. The interview process took 3 weeks. Multiple phone calls where Daniel shared his timeline, his research methods, his decision-making process, all framed as educational content rather than personal drama. Sarah was true to her word, keeping the focus on investigative techniques. How to verify credentials using state licensing databases. How to reverse image search to identify stolen photos. How to check business registrations and incorporation dates. How to document conversations legally. How to coordinate with law enforcement rather than trying to handle everything alone. When the article published, it was titled, "How One Tech Developer Stopped a Multi-million-dollar Fraud Ring, a Guide to Investigating Financial Scams," and it included a sidebar with a step-by-step checklist that readers could use if they suspected they were being targeted. Daniel's name appeared, but he wasn't the focus. The methodology was the focus, the tools were the focus, the prevention strategies were the focus. The article went moderately viral in financial literacy and consumer protection circles. Not the explosive personal drama of #Apex exposure, but a steady, sustained attention from people who actually wanted to learn rather than just consume drama. Daniel received dozens of emails through the newspaper's forwarding system from people thanking him for the methodology, from people who'd used the checklist to identify scams before losing money, from people who'd already lost money and were using his template to build cases against their own con artists. One email stood out. "Mr. Brooks, I'm a recently widowed woman who was approached by someone with an investment opportunity that sounded amazing. I used your checklist and discovered he was using a fake business license and stolen property photos. I reported him to police before wiring any money. You saved my late husband's life insurance money and helped me honor his memory by protecting what he'd left for me. Thank you for turning your pain into protection for others." Margaret Chin, Orlando, Florida. 1 year later, almost to the day, Daniel was having dinner with Lauren at their favorite Charlotte restaurant. They'd been together now for over a year and had recently moved in together, taking that step carefully but confidently, when his phone rang with a call from his mother. "Danny, baby, I need to tell you something and I'm not sure how you'll feel about it." Daniel felt his stomach tighten. Denise's tone suggested something significant. "Carla has been invited to speak at a Debtors Anonymous conference about her recovery and making amends. She asked me if I thought she should talk about what happened with you, or if she should keep you anonymous to protect your privacy. She wants to do the right thing, but she also knows her story about making amends might help other people. What do you want her to do?" Daniel thought about it for a long moment, about how his decision to expose Victor publicly had prevented future victims, about how his interview with Sarah Mitchell had helped people protect themselves, about how privacy had protected him but publicity had protected others, about whether Carla's story of genuine change and accountability might help people who were struggling with similar guilt and shame. "Tell her," Daniel finally said, "that she can share her story including the details about me, but on 3 conditions. 1, she makes clear I maintained boundaries and that respecting those boundaries was part of her accountability. 2, she emphasizes that making amends doesn't entitle her to forgiveness or restored relationship. And 3, she includes that I'm living a good life now, that what happened doesn't define me, and that people who've been betrayed can heal and move forward whether or not the person who hurt them changes." Denise was quiet for a moment, then said softly, "That's generous of you, baby. More generous than most people would be." "It's not generosity, Mama. It's recognition that her story might help someone else avoid becoming her, and that matters more than my privacy." 6 months after that, Daniel received a handwritten letter from someone he didn't know. A woman named Jennifer who'd heard Carla speak at the conference and had been inspired to make amends to her own family member she'd betrayed financially. "Your aunt's story about how you held her accountable while she grew into someone capable of real change helped me understand that my victim doesn't owe me forgiveness, but I owe them accountability regardless. I've started making restitution, payments to my cousin, and whether we ever have a relationship again, I'm finally being the person I should have been all along. Please know that your decision to let your aunt share her story, even though it exposed your pain again, helped me and probably dozens of other people face our own failures honestly. You created a ripple effect of accountability." Daniel added that letter to his Why It Mattered folder, which now contained dozens of messages from people he'd never meet, lives he'd changed without ever intending to, proof that choosing principle over comfort had costs but also had profound, lasting impact. That evening, Daniel did something he hadn't done in 3 years. He called Carla's number, the one she'd included in her letter so long ago. She answered on the 3rd ring, her voice cautious. "Hello. Auntie, it's Danny." Silence. Then a sound that might have been a sob being suppressed. "Danny. Hi. Is everything okay?" Her first concern was for him, not for herself or what this call might mean, and that told him everything. Everything's fine. I just wanted to call and tell you that I heard about your speaking at the conference, and I heard it went well. Mama said you respected my boundaries in how you told the story, and I appreciate that. Carla's voice was shaking. Of course. Danny, you don't owe me this call. I know I don't. That's why I'm making it. I'm calling because I want to, not because I have to. Another pause. How are you? Are you happy? Mama says you're in Charlotte now, that you're doing well, but I don't know if that's true or if she's just protecting me from knowing if you're struggling. I am happy, Daniel said, and realized he meant it. I'm with someone I care about, I'm doing work I find meaningful, I've got good friends, and I've processed what happened enough that it doesn't control me anymore. I'm not calling to rebuild our relationship. I'm not ready for that, and I might never be. But I'm calling to tell you that I see your efforts, I recognize your change, and I'm glad you've built something real instead of something performed. That matters, even if it doesn't change the past. Carla was crying openly now. Thank you. That's more than I deserve, and I'm grateful for it. Danny, I know you probably can't answer this, but I need to ask anyway. Do you think there might ever be a time when we could be in the same room? Not as close family, but as people who share history and wish each other well? I don't need you to answer now. I just need to know if it's possible or if I should accept that we'll always be separate. Daniel considered the question honestly. I don't know, Auntie. Maybe someday. But that day isn't today, and pushing for it won't make it come faster. The best thing you can do is continue being honest, continue making amends where possible, and continue living your real life instead of a performed one. If there's ever a time I'm ready to see you, I'll reach out. But I need you to be okay with that possibly never happening. I can be okay with that, Carla said quietly. I have to be, because what I want doesn't matter as much as what you need. Danny, I'm proud of you. I'm proud of who you've become despite what I tried to do to you. And I'm sorry, not sorry I got caught, not sorry I face consequences, but genuinely sorry that I betrayed you and made you question whether family love was real. They talked for another 10 minutes, surface-level updates, nothing deep, just the kind of conversation two people who share history, but not intimacy might have. When they hung up, Daniel didn't feel regret or relief exactly. Just a sense of completion, of having taken an action on his own terms, rather than reacting to pressure or expectation or obligation. He'd given Carla what he could give without compromising his boundaries. Acknowledgement of her change, recognition of her efforts, and honesty about his limitations. That was enough. 3 years and 6 months after the exposure at the Apex, Daniel Brooks was definitively not the same person who'd walked into that nightclub with righteous fury and carefully documented evidence. He'd learned that justice and revenge could achieve identical results, but leave different scars. That holding boundaries and maintaining relationships weren't mutually exclusive if everyone respected the terms, that changing someone's behavior didn't obligate him to welcome them back into his life, and most importantly, that surviving betrayal didn't mean becoming hard or closed or incapable of trust. It meant becoming discerning, careful, boundaried in ways that protected without isolating. The money that had started everything was now working for him through investments, generating passive income that let him choose projects based on meaning rather than necessity. The family that had fractured was slowly, carefully, rebuilding itself in new configurations that acknowledged rather than denied what had happened. The viral fame had faded into internet archaeology, something people occasionally stumbled across but no longer defined his present. And the question that had haunted him, did I do the right thing? Had transformed into acceptance that right and easy were different categories, that principled choices came with costs, and that he'd paid those costs consciously, honorably, and without regret even when the bill had been higher than expected. One evening, Marcus visited Charlotte with Jasmine to introduce Daniel and Lauren properly and spend a weekend together as couples. Over dinner, Marcus raised a glass. To my best friend, who taught me that doing the right thing isn't about whether everyone agrees with you, but about whether you can look yourself in the mirror. You saved multiple people, destroyed a criminal network, and survived family betrayal with your integrity intact. That's not a small thing, bro. That's legacy. Daniel felt uncomfortable with the praise, as he always did, but Lauren squeezed his hand under the table, and he realized he needed to accept compliments as well as criticism, needed to acknowledge that his choices had been difficult and right, costly and worthwhile. To Marcus, Daniel responded, who showed up at 2 a.m. when I needed him and never once suggested I should just let it go because family. Real friendship isn't agreeing with everything someone does. It's supporting them in doing what they believe is right even when it's hard. You did that, and I'm grateful. After dinner, as they walked through Charlotte's downtown, Marcus pulled Daniel aside. Real talk, are you happy? Because you seem happy, you say you're happy, but I've known you long enough to know sometimes you perform being okay when you're actually struggling. Daniel appreciated the question, the permission to be honest rather than performed. I'm happy, he said, and tested the words for truth. Not perfect, not problem-free, not without moments where I wonder if there was a better way to handle everything. But Marcus, I'm building something real instead of protecting something fake. I've got a partner who knows my whole story and chooses me anyway. I've got work that matters. I've got you and Jasmine as friends who actually show up. And I've made peace with the fact that Carla and I might never be close again, but her life is better for what I did even if our relationship isn't. That's enough. That's more than enough. That night, lying in bed next to Lauren with her breathing steady and sleep beside him, Daniel thought about the question that had started everything. Have you ever kept a secret so big that it felt like carrying a bomb in your pocket? He'd kept the secret of his windfall for exactly 3 days before telling Carla, and that decision had led to exposure, betrayal, public drama, family fracture, and eventually to Charlotte, to Lauren, to a life he'd never have built if everything had gone according to plan. He didn't regret telling Carla because the alternative, living in paranoid isolation, never trusting anyone with information about his success, would have been its own kind of prison. The betrayal had hurt, but it had also revealed truth. That Carla wasn't who he'd thought she was, that some family bonds were transactional rather than unconditional, that his ability to trust wasn't broken just because one person had proved untrustworthy. He'd survived something that could have destroyed him, had chosen justice when forgiveness would have been easier, had rebuilt himself into someone he actually respected rather than someone who just avoided being hurt again. The last email Daniel sent that night, before finally putting his phone down and choosing sleep, was to Mrs. Thornton. Mrs. Thornton, I wanted to check in and see how your fraud prevention program is going. I heard from Detective Warren that you've reached over 500 seniors with your workshops. That's 500 people who are safer because you turned your pain into protection for others. I've been thinking lately about legacy. Not the big dramatic kind, but the small persistent kind where choices ripple outward affecting people you'll never meet. You've created that, and I'm honored to have played a small part in making it possible. With gratitude, Daniel. Her response came the next morning. Daniel, at 75 years old, I thought my legacy would be being a victim who lost everything to a con artist. Instead, because you held Victor accountable and gave me the chance to help others, my legacy is being a teacher who prevents that pain for others. You gave me that gift, and I'll never be able to thank you enough. Your friend always, Patricia. So here's the final truth about what happened when Daniel's aunt tried to scam him out of $1 million after meeting a man at the club. Daniel exposed the scam, destroyed the relationship, faced enormous costs both social and emotional, rebuilt his life in a new city, processed his trauma through therapy, maintained boundaries while acknowledging change, and ultimately created ripple effects of protection and accountability that extended far beyond his personal situation. Carla lost everything she'd performed to have, but gained something more sustainable. Genuine relationships, honest work, real self-respect, and the painful but necessary understanding that betrayal has consequences even when you're sorry about it. Victor went to prison where he belonged, his fraud network was dismantled, and hundreds or thousands of future victims were protected by one man's decision to document and expose rather than quietly handle within family. And the money that started everything? It provided security, enabled choices, helped people who deserved help, and ultimately proved to be exactly what money should be, a tool that creates options rather than a goal that defines worth. If you've made it this far in the story, you understand that this isn't about whether Daniel was right or wrong. It's about whether having principles and maintaining them, even when they cost you everything you used to call family, is sustainable, is honorable, is worth it. The answer Daniel found is deeply personal. It was worth it for him because protecting others and living authentically mattered more than comfortable relationships built on overlooking betrayal. But someone else might have made different choices and had those choices be equally valid for their situation. Comment below and tell me your biggest takeaway from Daniel's story. Did it change how you think about family loyalty versus personal boundaries? Did it make you reconsider any relationships where you've overlooked betrayal for the sake of keeping peace? Did it inspire you to document and expose wrongdoing you're aware of, Or did it make you grateful you've never had to make such an impossible choice? And if you haven't already subscribed, do it now because you've just experienced a story about the real cost of justice, the complexity of family, the possibility of change, and the question we all eventually face. When someone we love betrays us, do we owe them forgiveness, or do we owe ourselves protection? The answer isn't simple, isn't universal, and isn't the same for everyone. But Daniel found his answer, and maybe somewhere in his journey, you found yours too. Thank you for staying with this story to the end. Remember, the people who deserve to be in your life will never make you choose between your well-being and their presence.